Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the discovery of the New World in 1492. Not the fairy tale version, you know, but the tale where chance, ambition, and a fair bit of misunderstanding chart a new course for history. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the late 1400, the world must have seemed like a pretty small place to the average European. Most people were convinced that if you sailed west long enough, you'd fall off the edge of the earth and into a cosmic abyss. But then there was Christopher Columbus, a Genos mariner who looked at this perilous map and thought, why not take a leap of faith? But hold on, this wasn't some whimsical daydream. Columbus wasn't doodling in the margins of his notebook. He was playing a high-stakes game of economic desperation. It's the 15th century, and Europe is feeling the pinch. The spice trade is the Bitcoin of the day, volatile, highly sought after, and making people question their life choices. Pepper, nutmeg, cloves. These tiny flavor bombs were worth their weight in gold. The catch: they had to be shipped from the far-off Indies, a journey that made today's global supply chain look like a walk in the park. Overland Silk Road was about as reliable as a dial-up modem, and the sea routes were monopolized by the Portuguese, who were guarding their spice trade like a dragon hoarding gold. Enter Spain, a newly unified nation itching to make its mark. They were playing catch-up with Portugal, who had already secured the most lucrative trade routes around Africa. Spain needed a win, and fast. Columbus saw their desperation and pitched an idea that was bold, risky, and just this side of crazy. He proposed to sail west to reach the east, a concept that seemed as backward as trying to find a shortcut through a hedge maze. But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Now, Columbus's pitch to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand was less Shark Tank and more desperate but determined. He promised untold wealth, new lands, and the chance to spread Christianity to places that had never even heard of a Bible. In a time when crusades were still fresh in the collective memory, that last bit was crucial. Columbus was selling more than a trade route. He was selling a dream of empire and divine destiny. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of this sales pitch. In reality, Columbus was asking for a lot. He wanted ships, men, and a title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, along with a cut of whatever riches he found. It was a classic case of I scratch your back, you scratch mine, with a side of I promise I'm totally worth it. The Spanish monarchs, after much deliberation, decided to roll the dice. They were in for about 90,000 maravedis, a hefty sum, equivalent to about $500,000 today. They were betting on Columbus like he was a startup promising the next big thing. Here's the kicker. Columbus was so convinced he was heading to Asia that he seriously underestimated the Earth's circumference by a couple of thousand miles. He figured he'd hit Japan after a few weeks of sailing, tops. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Instead, he stumbled upon a landmass that would change the course of history in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. But let's not jump ahead. For now, Columbus was a man on a mission, armed with a shaky map, a firm belief in his destiny, and a royal nod to set sail. Who knew that this would be the dawn of a new era, the start of an age of exploration that would reshape the globe. But hey, that's a story for another time. And so, with the ink barely dry on the royal agreement, Columbus found himself at the helm of one of history's most infamous flotillas. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, think of them as the Yuba Pool of the high seas, were hardly the luxury liners you might imagine. These weren't grand ships built for comfort, but rather sturdy utilitarian caravels, each designed to brave the unpredictable whims of the Atlantic. And brave they did, though brave might be a generous term when you're crammed into quarters so tight, even sardines would roll their eyes. The Nina and the Pinta were both caravels, nimble and relatively small, with the Nina clocking in at about 50 feet long, while the Pinta stretched to a slightly more spacious 70 feet. The Santa Maria, the flagship, was a bit larger, a whopping 62 feet long. As flagships go, she was more tugboat than Titanic. Columbus, not exactly the poster child for spatial awareness, seemed to think these vessels were ample enough to carry not just his crew, but the weight of his ambitious dreams. Life aboard these ships was no Caribbean cruise. Picture this: around 90 men, with Columbus as their fearless, or perhaps deluded, leader, set out to cross uncharted waters. A typical crew member's daily experience involved sharing cramped quarters, dealing with the constant stench of unwashed bodies, and surviving on hardtack and salted meat that could double as paperweights. The cherry on top, a delightful side of scurvy, a disease as common as it was dreaded, leaving sailors with bleeding gums and a penchant for gum disease. Yet for all the hardships, the crew had signed on for a promise of adventure and riches. To many of these men, Columbus's voyage was the 15th century equivalent of a get-rich-quick scheme. Except if things went south, there was no back to the drawing board. The stakes were high, and the only safety net was the ocean's cold embrace. But these were tough times, and Europe had more starving adventurers than sensible business plans. Columbus, for his part, remained steadfast in his belief that Asia lay just beyond the horizon. Armed with maps that any modern cartographer would laugh out of the room, he set his course. His calculations were as optimistic as they were flawed. He figured Japan, or Sipangu as it was known, could be reached in a brisk 400 nautical miles. In reality, he was off by a continent and several thousand miles. But hey, nobody's perfect, right? As the days turned into weeks, the crew's enthusiasm began to wane. The endless horizon stretched before them like a cosmic joke, and doubts crept in with every wave. Columbus, however, was nothing if not a master of morale. He kept the spirit alive with promises of land just beyond the next sunrise. If only the GPS had been around to burst that bubble sooner. Finally, on October 12, 1492, a lookout named Rodrigo de Triana shouted the words that would go down in history. Tierra, tierra. Land was indeed in sight, but it wasn't the gold-laden shores of Asia. Instead, they had stumbled upon a tiny island in the Bahamas, which Columbus named San Salvador, meaning Holy Savior. Not quite the bustling markets of the East, but close enough for a crew desperate to plant their feet on solid ground. Now here's where things get really ironic. Columbus, convinced he'd landed somewhere in the Indies, dubbed the indigenous people he encountered Indians. It was a classic case of mistaken identity that would persist for centuries. These Indians, part of the Taino community, must have been more than a little puzzled by these strange, armor-clad visitors who arrived with big dreams and even bigger misconceptions. This so-called discovery was a textbook example of European audacity. The New World wasn't new at all. It was home to millions, with civilizations more advanced than Columbus could comprehend. The Aztecs and the Incas, with their sprawling cities and rich cultures, were no mere footnotes in history. Yet, from a Eurocentric viewpoint, they might as well have been on another planet. As the days rolled on, Columbus explored further, hopping from island to island like a tourist with a faulty map. He planted the Spanish flag with a sense of divine right, convinced he was laying the groundwork for a new empire. His reports back to Spain brimmed with tales of endless riches and potential converts, though reality was less generous. Gold was scarce, and the only spices Columbus could claim were the ones he brought with him. Despite the lack of tangible wealth, Columbus returned to Spain a hero. His voyage had cracked open the door to the Americas, setting off a chain reaction of exploration, conquest, and colonization that would reshape the globe. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, Columbus stood at the dawn of a new era, oblivious to the monumental consequences of his journey. In the end, the voyage that began with cramped quarters and a captain who couldn't tell Asia from his atlas became the stuff of legends. The romanticized version of Columbus's journey would paint him as a visionary, but reality tells a different story. He was a man driven by ambition, ignorance, and a fair amount of luck, an unlikely hero in a tale where the stakes were as vast as the ocean itself. And so, as Columbus sailed back to Spain, unaware of the storm his discovery would unleash, the world was on the brink of transformation. But the real story, with its twists and turns, was only just beginning. Stay tuned, because things are about to get even more complicated. As Columbus sailed back to Spain, blissfully unaware of the Pandora's box he had unwittingly opened, let's take a moment to zoom in on those initial, awkward interactions with the Taino people in the Bahamas. They weren't exactly the red carpet welcomes of myth, nor were they the straightforward exchanges Columbus might have hoped for. Instead, these encounters were more like a bizarre episode of cultural exchange, lost in translation. When Columbus and his crew first set foot on what they believed to be the outer edges of Asia, they were greeted not by the bustling ports of the East, but by the Taino, an indigenous group who had been thriving in the Caribbean long before Columbus's compass got a workout. The Taino, understandably curious and perhaps a tad skeptical, must have viewed these foreign visitors with a mix of intrigue and caution, akin to a homeowner spotting a door-to-door salesman on the horizon. The Taino, described by Columbus in his diary as a people very gentle and without knowledge of what is evil, were not the gold-flashing merchants Columbus expected. Instead, they lived in a society where wealth wasn't measured in precious metals, but in community and harmony. They wore small gold ornaments, enough to catch Columbus's eye, but not enough to fill his cargo hold with the riches he had promised back home. And here's where the transactional reality kicked in. Columbus, ever the opportunist, saw the Taino's gold trinkets and immediately assumed there was more where that came from. This wasn't a peaceful handshake. It was a calculated assessment of potential profit. Columbus's interactions with the Taino were marked by a stark imbalance of power and understanding. To Columbus, the Taino were potential subjects of the Spanish crown, people to be converted, traded with, or exploited, depending on what the situation called for. The Taino, on the other hand, were likely puzzled by these pale-skinned strangers with their strange metal armor and insatiable curiosity for gold. It's not that the Taino didn't understand trade. They did, but their economy wasn't based on the same cutthroat principles Columbus was bringing to their shores. In Columbus's mind, the Taino were just waiting to be introduced to European notions of commerce and Christianity. The reality was a bit more nuanced. The Taino were their own people, with their own beliefs, languages, and systems of trade. They weren't sitting around waiting for Columbus to enlighten them. They had been navigating their world just fine without him. The first exchanges were, to put it mildly, awkward. Columbus offered the Taino glass beads, brass bells, and other trinkets, hoping to win their favor and glean information about local gold sources. The Taino, perhaps bemused or simply polite, accepted these gifts. For Columbus, this was a sign that the Taino could be easily won over or, more ominously, easily subdued. He noted in his journal that, with 50 men, they could all be subjected and made to do all that one might wish. Not exactly the benevolent exchange of cultures that romantic legends would have you believe. The Taino's response to Columbus's overtures was one of cautious hospitality. They provided food and water, probably more out of curiosity and goodwill than anything else. But Columbus's focus was firmly on the gold. He repeatedly pressed the Taino for information, desperate to find the source of the shiny metal he had glimpsed. Despite the lack of substantial gold discoveries, Columbus clung to his belief that he was on the brink of untold wealth, a belief that would later fuel further expeditions and more tragic encounters. Now, let's not paint Columbus as some cartoon villain twirling a mustache, but his actions were far from altruistic. The man was driven by a heady mix of ambition and desperation, and his interactions with the Taino were colored by that. Columbus wasn't here to make friends. He was here to claim, convert, and conquer. His reports back to Spain were filled with optimistic half-truths, glossing over the complexities of the people he met in favor of a narrative that would secure more funding for future voyages. And speaking of narratives, Columbus's journey has been spun into a tale of discovery and bravery, but the reality was more of a culture clash with a side of imperial ambition. The Taino's world was about to be upended in ways they couldn't have imagined, and Columbus's voyage was just the beginning of a tidal wave of European exploration that would sweep across the Americas. Columbus's first contact with the Taino set the stage for a complex and often tragic history of interaction between Europeans and indigenous peoples in the New World. The myth of peaceful handshakes and mutual understanding is a comforting one, but it glosses over the harsh realities of what was essentially the opening chapter in a long story of colonization and cultural upheaval. As Columbus sailed on, exploring more islands and encountering more indigenous communities, he continued to search for the elusive riches he had promised. Each island he visited was a new opportunity to assert Spanish claims and expand his own legend. But the more he explored, the clearer it became that this wasn't the Asia he had envisioned. Instead, it was a complex world with its own peoples, histories, and cultures, a world that would soon be irrevocably altered by the forces Columbus had unwittingly set in motion. So, as we leave Columbus at this moment in history, convinced of his success and oblivious to the consequences, remember that the story we're told often leaves out the messy bits. The first contact with the Taino wasn't just a footnote in Columbus's adventure. It was a pivotal moment that would echo through the centuries. And the legend of Columbus, like all legends, is a mix of fact and fiction, romance and reality. The real story, with all its twists and turns, is far more complicated and far more human. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started. So, with Columbus blissfully ignorant of the cultural tsunami he'd set in motion, he pointed his ships back towards Spain, his sails full of optimism and a head full of misconceptions. Now, you might think navigating home would be a piece of cake after charting unknown waters, but the return voyage was anything but smooth sailing. Columbus faced storms, dwindling supplies, and a crew teetering on the edge of mutiny. But hey, what's an epic journey without a few final hurdles? When Columbus finally docked back in Spain in March 1493, he was greeted not with a hero's welcome, but with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. After all, he didn't exactly bring back the spice-laden treasure troves he'd promised. Instead, he had a handful of gold trinkets, a few exotic birds, and some Taino captives who were probably wondering what on earth they had signed up for. But here's where Columbus's true genius shone, not in navigation, but in storytelling. Columbus spun his voyage into a tale of triumph, a theatrical masterpiece that would make any modern PR team proud. He presented the New World as a land teeming with potential wealth and souls ripe for conversion, conveniently glossing over the fact that he hadn't found a trace of Asia. His reports were brimming with vivid descriptions of the lush landscapes and the innocent natives who were just waiting to be enlightened by European civilization. The Spanish court, hungry for glory and riches, was all ears. Who cared if it wasn't exactly the East? It was new, it was exciting, and it was theirs for the taking. And just like that, Columbus was catapulted into celebrity status. The man who had once struggled to get his wild ideas funded was now the toast of the town, paraded through the streets like a rock star. He was granted titles, wealth, and the promise of more ships for a second voyage. Suddenly, the Genos mariner was the face of Spain's imperial ambitions, a living embodiment of the dream of expansion and conquest. But the real magic trick here was how Columbus's miscalculation was turned into a strategic victory. The Spanish crown, ever the opportunists, saw the potential in Columbus's accidental find. They spun the narrative of discovery into one of divine providence, a sign that Spain was destined to lead the charge into this brave new world. The reality: Columbus had stumbled onto a continent that would soon become the backdrop for some of history's most brutal and transformative events. But for now, the focus was squarely on the glittering possibilities, not the gritty realities. And speaking of glitter, let's talk gold, because Europe was about to go full-on treasure hunt mode. Columbus's tales of gold, albeit meager, were enough to spark a frenzy back in the old world. The news spread like wildfire, and soon every country with a seaworthy vessel was plotting their own expeditions. Gold fever had gripped Europe, turning the continent into a den of financial speculation and imperial ambition. You see, in the late 15th century, gold wasn't just a symbol of wealth. It was the lifeblood of economies. It fueled trade, financed wars, and kept the wheels of monarchy turning. The idea of vast, untapped reserves of gold in the New World was like dangling a carrot in front of a very hungry rabbit. Nations scrambled to stake their claim, driven by the promise of riches and the allure of empire. The Spanish monarchy, seeing the economic potential, wasted no time in organizing subsequent voyages. They were determined to capitalize on Columbus's discovery and secure a foothold in this land of opportunity before their rivals could. The stakes were high, and the returns promised to be astronomical. This wasn't just about exploration anymore. It was about empire building, with all the ruthlessness and ambition that entailed. But here's the kicker: the New World was no El Dorado. Sure, there was gold, but not the mountains of it that Columbus had hinted at. The economic boom that Europe imagined was more mirage than reality, at least initially. Yet the myth persisted, fueled by tales of adventure and the tantalizing promise of wealth. It was the original gold rush, long before the 49 ers ever set foot in California. As the Spanish crown financed more voyages, the reality of what they had stumbled upon began to sink in. The New World was a complex, vibrant place, home to civilizations that were far from the primitive societies Columbus had described. It was a land of opportunity, yes, but also of challenges and contradictions. The indigenous peoples, with their own cultures and economies, were about to face the full force of European imperialism, a force that would reshape their world in ways they couldn't have foreseen. In the end, Columbus's return to Spain marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Europe, but for the world. His misadventure had opened a Pandora's box, setting off a chain reaction that would lead to exploration, colonization, and exploitation on a scale never before seen. It was a time of wonder and horror, of discovery and destruction, a time when the world got a whole lot bigger and a whole lot more complicated. As Columbus prepared for his next voyage, buoyed by his newfound fame and the promise of riches, he remained oblivious to the storm he had set in motion. The New World was no longer a distant dream, but a tantalizing reality, and the race to conquer it was on. Stay tuned, because the saga of exploration is far from over, and the consequences of Columbus's journey are only just beginning to unfold. And so, the stage was set for the grand, chaotic spectacle known as the Age of Exploration, with Columbus as the unwitting director of this historical drama. But let's pause and roll back the credits to see how the cast of characters fared in this epic tale. Was Columbus a hero, a villain, or just a guy who couldn't read a map to save his life? Spoiler alert, it's complicated. First, let's address the label of hero. Columbus did, after all, make a daring voyage across the Atlantic, navigating uncharted waters with nothing but a star chart and a healthy dose of optimism. He opened up the New World to Europe, sparking a wave of exploration that would fuel the Renaissance and the eventual rise of Western dominance. Sounds heroic, right, but hold onto your tricorn hats, because it's not all glory and gold. The villain tag isn't too hard to justify either. Columbus's expeditions had catastrophic effects on the indigenous populations. The Taino people, who had greeted him with curiosity and hospitality, were soon subjected to the brutal realities of European colonization. Within a few decades, their numbers would be decimated by disease, forced labor, and violence. Columbus himself was no stranger to harsh tactics. His governance of the new colonies was marked by tyranny and exploitation, leading to his eventual arrest and return to Spain in disgrace in 1500. So, villain, definitely in the running. But let's not oversimplify. Columbus was also a product of his time, a time when exploration was a risky venture driven by economic desperation and imperial ambition. He wasn't the first explorer to sail into the unknown, nor would he be the last to leave a trail of destruction in his wake. He was a man caught up in the tides of history, driven by dreams of wealth and glory that were as much a part of the human condition as they were of his personal ambition. In many ways, Columbus was just a guy with a bad sense of direction and a knack for storytelling, whose blunders set in motion events beyond his comprehension. And while we're on the topic of blunders, let's talk about the cultural and ecological upheaval known as the Columbian Exchange. This was the true ripple effect of Columbus's voyages, an exchange of goods, ideas, and diseases between the Old and New Worlds. Europe got tomatoes, potatoes, and maize, while the Americas were introduced to wheat, sugarcane, and, unfortunately, smallpox and measles. The latter decimated indigenous populations, while the former transformed European agriculture and cuisines. Imagine Italian cuisine without tomatoes, or Irish history without potatoes. It's like trying to picture a world without memes, utterly unthinkable. The Columbian Exchange wasn't just about food and disease, though. It was a global reshuffling of the deck, with new crops leading to population booms in Europe and Asia, while the forced migration of enslaved Africans reshaped the demographics of the Americas. These exchanges were the building blocks of globalization, for better or for worse, and they set the stage for the modern world. But let's not sugarcoat it. The human cost was staggering, and the cultural impacts were profound and often devastating. Now, let's zoom out and take a look at the so-called Age of Exploration. This era kicked off by Columbus's accidental discovery, saw European powers scrambling to stake their claims across the globe. It was a time of incredible voyages and breathtaking discoveries, yet also one of conquest and colonization. The Spanish, Portuguese, English, Dutch, and French all vied for dominance, carving up the world like it was a pie at a particularly cutthroat dinner party. The competition fueled advances in navigation, cartography, and shipbuilding, but it also led to centuries of conflict and imperial oppression. And here's the kicker. While these explorations expanded the horizons of human knowledge, they also entrenched systems of exploitation and inequality that are still with us today. The wealth extracted from the colonies fueled the rise of Europe, laying the foundations for industrialization and the modern capitalist system. Yet, this wealth came at an enormous human cost, borne by indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans whose stories are often overshadowed by tales of daring explorers and bold conquests. So, why does all this still matter today? Well, Columbus's voyages mark the beginning of a global interconnectedness that defines our world. The cultural and economic exchanges set in motion by his discovery have shaped everything from the global economy to the dinner table. But more than that, Columbus's legacy forces us to confront the darker sides of exploration, the costs of empire, the impacts of colonization, and the narratives we choose to tell about our past. In the end, Columbus's story isn't just about one man or one voyage. It's a microcosm of the human experience, full of ambition, hubris, discovery, and unintended consequences. It's a reminder that the past is complex, filled with stories that defy easy categorization. Columbus was neither hero nor villain, but a flawed, ambitious man whose journey changed the world in ways he could never imagine. And as we grapple with the legacies of exploration and empire, perhaps the most important lesson is this. History is messy, and it's up to us to learn from its complexities rather than oversimplifying its narratives. So, as you drift off into the realm of dreams, take this with you. The story of Columbus isn't just a tale of ships and sails, but a deep dive into the currents of history that continue to shape our world. Whether he was a hero, a villain, or just a guy with a compass and a dream, one thing is clear. Columbus's journey was just the beginning, and the real adventure is understanding the world he left in his wake. Sweet dreams, and may your voyages always lead to new discoveries. In 1122, when Eleanor of Aquitaine was born, the world was getting its first taste of a woman who could outwit the best of them while draped in enough wealth to make modern billionaires blush. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Young Eleanor wasn't just any medieval heiress. She was the medieval heiress. When she inherited the Duchy of Aquitaine at 15, she controlled more land than the King of France himself. That's right, more land. Her territory stretched from the Loire River to the Pyrenees, like a particularly grand monopoly board where she owned most of the prime real estate. Now, here's where things get interesting. In 1137, Eleanor married Louis Roman VII of France. This wasn't your average Cinderella meets Prince Charming story. Oh no. This was a strategic alliance, a political chess move made on a board as expansive as Eleanor's lands. Louis was the kind of guy who had the title, but not necessarily the clout. Marrying Eleanor was like hitting the medieval jackpot. Sure, he was now officially King of France, but it was Eleanor who brought the assets. The dowry, let's just say it was enough to make even the wealthiest nobleman drool with envy. But Eleanor wasn't just about sitting pretty on a throne. While Louis was king in title, Eleanor wielded influence that extended beyond the superficial glamour of court life. She was a queen in every sense that mattered. She even accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade, which, let's face it, was less of a religious expedition and more of a medieval family vacation gone wrong. Picture Eleanor riding through the dusty roads of the Holy Land, surrounded by knights and banners, all while dealing with the kind of family drama that would make a reality TV producer salivate. The Crusades, with their idealistic veneer of holy quests, were brutal. Eleanor saw it all firsthand. The reality was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about survival, political maneuvering, and sometimes outright chaos. It was a far cry from the romantic tales spun by troubadours. Speaking of troubadours, Eleanor had a keen interest in them and their art. She was a patron of the arts and played a pivotal role in the development of courtly love, a concept that would shape the literature and culture of Europe for centuries. It's a bit ironic, considering her first marriage was more about realpolitik than romance. Back to Louis Roman VII, the marriage was a complex tapestry of personal and political threads. Louis was pious to a fault, often more monk than monarch, which was great for spiritual brownie points, but not so much for running a kingdom. Eleanor, on the other hand, was vibrant, headstrong, and had little patience for Louis's monastic inclinations. It's no surprise that the marriage eventually hit the rocks. Rumors of infidelity, personality clashes, and the lack of a male heir, which, by the way, was the medieval equivalent of a ticking time bomb, all contributed to the unraveling of their union. The annulment of their marriage in 1152 was a seismic event, sending shockwaves across the political landscape of Europe. Eleanor, however, was not one to mope around post-divorce. Within months, she married Henry Plantagenet, who would soon become Henry Roman II of England. Talk about trading up. This move not only secured her position, but also set the stage for one of the most powerful royal dynasties in English history. Eleanor's early life and strategic marriages show us that she was not just a passive player in the Game of Thrones. She was a force of nature, a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of medieval politics with a savvy that was rare for her time. Her story is a testament to the power of intellect and influence, wrapped in the guise of glamour and wealth. And while the troubadours might have sung of romantic queens and noble deeds, Eleanor's life was a reminder that the reality was often far more complicated and infinitely more interesting. And so, Eleanor of Aquitaine found herself at the epicenter of a political earthquake with the annulment of her marriage to Louis Roman VII in 1152. This wasn't just a personal breakup. It was a tectonic shift that split a kingdom in two. When you're the medieval equivalent of a Fortune 500 CEO, dividing assets isn't about who gets the flat-screen TV. It's about who controls the lands, armies, and influence. The official reason for their annulment was consanguinity, a fancy term for "we're too closely related," which was a convenient excuse in an age where family trees often looked like tangled vines. In reality, it was a mix of personal and political friction. Eleanor wasted no time playing the medieval dating game. Just 8 weeks after the ink dried on her annulment, she tied the knot with Henry Plantagenet, future Henry Roman II of England. If her first marriage was a strategic alliance, this one was a masterstroke. Henry was 10 years her junior, but don't let the age gap fool you. This was no cougar situation. Eleanor was a seasoned political operator, and Henry was a rising star with ambition as vast as his territories. Together, they controlled an empire stretching from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees, which, for those keeping track, meant Eleanor's influence just went from significant to colossal. Their marriage wasn't just a personal union, it was a geopolitical coup. When Eleanor married Henry, she effectively transferred her vast lands from the French crown to the English realm, tweaking the nose of her ex-husband, Louis Roman VII. This maneuver was akin to pulling the rug out from under a rival's feet, leaving Louis with an uncomfortable draft. The marriage supercharged the Anglo-Norman realm, creating what historians would later call the Angevin Empire. And if that sounds impressive, that's because it was, covering more territory than today's France and England combined. Eleanor's role wasn't limited to being the supportive wife, standing 2 steps behind her husband. She was a ruler in her own right, co-governing with Henry in an era when the idea of a woman wielding power was about as popular as a wet blanket. She had a hand in the administration of her lands, ensuring that her territories were well managed and profitable. In a time when the average life expectancy was less than 40, Eleanor was outliving and outmaneuvering many of her contemporaries, proving that her political savvy was not just a flash in the pan. But let's not sugarcoat it. Henry and Eleanor's marriage was no fairy tale. They were both fiery and headstrong, which made for some explosive dinner conversations. Their union was plagued by the kind of drama that would make a soap opera writer blush. Infidelity, power struggles, and a large brood of offspring, many of whom came with their own ambitions and rivalries. Eleanor's knack for political strategy was matched only by her ability to raise a veritable dynasty of future monarchs. With 8 children, including the legendary Richard the Lionheart and the infamous King John. Yes, the one who signed the Magna Carta. Eleanor was essentially running a medieval monarch production line. Her experience raising such a formidable brood was not just a domestic challenge, but a political one. Each child was a potential heir, a future ruler whose alliances and marriages could shift the balance of power in Europe. Eleanor's involvement in their upbringing was not just about teaching them table manners. It was about grooming future kings and queens who could navigate the treacherous waters of European politics. Her ability to juggle the roles of mother and monarch was a testament to her resilience and strategic acumen. Eleanor's influence was felt far beyond the nursery. She was instrumental in the governance of Henry's empire, advising on matters of state, and even acting as regent during his absences. This wasn't a ceremonial role. Eleanor was in the trenches, making decisions that would shape the course of history. She was a patron of the arts, a supporter of the church, and a champion of legal reform, showing that her vision extended beyond her immediate political concerns. Yet, for all her accomplishments, Eleanor's life wasn't without its setbacks. Her marriage to Henry eventually soured, culminating in a full-blown rebellion by their sons against their father. Eleanor, ever the strategist, sided with her sons in their revolt, a decision that would lead to her imprisonment by Henry for over a decade. It was a dramatic twist, but one that only added to her legend. Even in captivity, Eleanor's influence continued to loom large over the political landscape. Eleanor of Aquitaine's story is one of power, ambition, and resilience. She was a woman who refused to be sidelined by the constraints of her time, instead forging a path that would leave an indelible mark on history. Her life was a tapestry of triumphs and trials, woven together with threads of political cunning and personal strength. As we continue to unravel the layers of her legacy, we find a figure who was far more than the romanticized queen of troubadour tales. She was a force of nature whose impact reverberates to this day. As the saga of Eleanor unfolds, there's much more to explore in the chapters to come. So, just as Eleanor's life was reaching a crescendo, Henry decided that imprisoning his wife was a reasonable reaction to rebellion. But let's not jump to conclusions about Eleanor's incarceration being a medieval version of house arrest for a damsel in distress. This was Eleanor of Aquitaine we're talking about, more Joan Jett than Jane Austen. Her imprisonment was less about silencing her and more a tactical move in the high-stakes chess game that was 12th century politics. You have to understand that Eleanor and Henry's marriage was like a medieval soap opera with a budget bigger than Game of Thrones. They had power, they had ambition, and they had a whopping 8 kids, each with a claim to royal fame. When Henry Roman II locked Eleanor up in 1173, it was after she backed their sons in an uprising against him. It was a family feud to rival any Thanksgiving dinner gone wrong. The rebellion was essentially the Plantagenet version of Father Knows Best, except the kids were saying, "No, actually, we know best." Eleanor's imprisonment lasted until Henry's death in 1189, but don't be fooled into thinking she was languishing in a dank tower. She was kept in relatively comfortable conditions, moving between various castles like a high-profile guest who couldn't quite leave. Her confinement was strategic. Henry needed to neutralize a threat without causing an international incident. Eleanor wasn't stripped of her influence. She was merely paused, like a game of chess waiting for the next move. During this time, the economic underpinnings of their empire were complex and crucial. Running a kingdom wasn't all jousts and banquets, though those were nice perks. The Plantagenet Empire was a sprawling conglomerate of territories that required a robust economic system to function. We're talking about an economy that included everything from wool trade to land taxes, with every penny accounted for by a medieval treasury department that would make a modern accountant's head spin. Eleanor, with her extensive experience managing Aquitaine's resources, was no stranger to the financial juggling act needed to keep the realm thriving. Eleanor's political savvy extended to managing alliances, which were as essential as the gold in the royal coffers. In the medieval world, alliances were your insurance policy, your backup plan, your ace up the sleeve when the chips were down. Eleanor's network was vast, stretching across Europe like a web of influence ready to be tugged at a moment's notice. Her ability to forge and maintain these alliances was a testament to her political acumen. The myth of Eleanor as a tragic captive overshadows her enduring influence during this period. Even when sidelined, she managed to cultivate a network of supporters and allies. She wasn't just waiting for rescue, she was biding her time, plotting her return to the political arena. Meanwhile, Henry was busy juggling his own set of challenges, from maintaining control over his territories to dealing with a brood of rebellious sons who were as much a handful as they were potential heirs. The economics of their empire were another layer of complexity. The Plantagenet lands were a patchwork of feudal obligations, trade routes, and taxation systems that required constant oversight. Revenue from land rents, trade tariffs, and feudal dues poured into the royal treasury, funding everything from castle maintenance to military campaigns. Eleanor, with her experience managing the prosperous Duchy of Aquitaine, was well versed in the financial intricacies that kept the empire afloat. And let's not forget the role of the church in all this. The clergy were not just spiritual leaders, they were economic and political heavyweights. The church owned vast swaths of land and wielded influence that could make or break kings. Eleanor knew this and maintained a delicate balance, ensuring that her interests aligned with those of the church when necessary. Because nothing says, "I'm in charge," like having divine support. Henry's death in 1189 marked the end of Eleanor's so-called imprisonment, but it was also the dawn of a new era for her. No longer the sidelined queen, she emerged as a key player in shaping the future of the Plantagenet dynasty. She immediately set about securing the throne for her son Richard the Lionheart, ensuring that her family's hold on the crown was unchallenged. This wasn't just a motherly duty. It was a political maneuver that solidified her legacy as one of the most formidable queens in history. It's important to remember that Eleanor's imprisonment was not a reflection of weakness, but a strategic pause in her relentless pursuit of power and influence. Her ability to navigate the turbulent waters of medieval politics, even from behind castle walls, underscores her status as a medieval powerhouse. She was a queen who refused to be defined by her circumstances, instead using every opportunity to prepare for her next move on the grand stage of European politics. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not a damsel in distress. She was a force to be reckoned with, even when confined by the very structures she helped to shape. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of intellect and influence in a world where women were often sidelined. As we continue to explore her legacy, we find that Eleanor was not just a queen of her time. She was a queen for all time, a symbol of resilience and strength in the face of adversity. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into Eleanor's story, examining how she wielded power with unparalleled skill and left an indelible mark on history that continues to resonate today. There's more to Eleanor's tale, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next chapter in this epic saga. As Eleanor of Aquitaine emerged from her so-called imprisonment in 1189, she wasn't just dusting off the cobwebs. She was gearing up for one of history's greatest political comebacks. Her son, Richard the Lionheart, was now king, and Eleanor wasn't about to let a little thing like age slow her down. At 67, when most would be content with a warm hearth and a good book, Eleanor was still in the thick of medieval statecraft. Her role was far from ceremonial. She was the power behind the throne, a queen mother with a capital Q and M. Richard, bless his lion-hearted soul, had his eyes set on the Holy Land. The Third Crusade was calling, and like any ambitious king, he couldn't resist the siren song of glory and guard. But while Richard was off playing hero in the desert, someone had to keep the home fires burning, and that someone was Eleanor. She managed the realm, quelled rebellions, and ensured that the gold kept flowing into the royal coffers. It's the kind of multitasking that would make even the most seasoned project manager break into a cold sweat. Now, let's talk economics. Richard's crusading wasn't cheap. The Third Crusade was a financial black hole, a sinkhole of knightly aspirations and costly provisions. Richard raised funds through a tax known as the Saladin Tithe, a 1/10 levy on income and movables from both clergy and laity. It was a bold move, akin to modern governments suddenly deciding to tax your Netflix subscription at double the rate. Eleanor, with her extensive experience and networks, was instrumental in ensuring these funds were collected and managed effectively. She was essentially the CFO of the Angevin Empire, balancing books and keeping creditors at bay. But Eleanor's influence didn't stop at mere number crunching. She was also the diplomatic envoy extraordinaire. Picture her, not as a stately queen stuck in court, but more like a medieval globetrotter with a penchant for high-stakes negotiations. Eleanor traversed Europe, forging alliances and securing Richard's interests while he was off chasing the Crusaders' dream. Her diplomatic missions were legendary, not just for their scale, but for their sheer audacity. Take her trip to Castile, for instance, where she arranged the marriage of her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, to the son of the French king. It was a strategic move designed to keep the French crown in check and secure an ally. With Eleanor, every marriage was a move on the chessboard, every alliance a potential checkmate. She understood that politics was less about brute force and more about the delicate art of influence. And let's not forget about those Saladin rumors. Legends abound about Eleanor's supposed encounters with the famed Muslim leader during Richard's crusades. The romantic tales of clandestine meetings and secret truces are tantalizing, but they belong more to the realm of myth than history. In reality, Eleanor's interactions with Saladin, if they happened at all, were likely indirect, conducted through envoys and letters. It's a reminder that legends often simplify the nuanced dance of medieval diplomacy into something more akin to a Hollywood script. Eleanor's later years were marked by her tireless efforts to maintain her family's dominance. When Richard was captured on his way home from the Crusades, courtesy of the Holy Roman Emperor, who saw an opportunity too good to pass up, it was Eleanor who tirelessly worked to secure his release. She traveled across Europe, rallying support, raising the colossal ransom of 150,000 marks, that's about 2 to 3 years' worth of England's annual revenue, and negotiating with power players who held her son's fate in their hands. Eleanor was not just a mother fighting for her son. She was a monarch ensuring the stability of her realm. As Richard returned to England in 1194, Eleanor's role shifted once again. With Richard back on the throne, could have stepped back into a quieter life, but stepping back was never in Eleanor's repertoire. Instead, she continued to advise Richard, offering counsel backed by decades of political savvy. Her influence was a constant, a reminder that even as the world changed, her grasp on the levers of power remained firm. And then there was King John, Eleanor's youngest son, who ascended the throne in 1199 after Richard's untimely death. If Richard was the lion, John was more of a fox, cunning, but often outmaneuvered. His reign was plagued by disputes, not least of which was the infamous signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. Eleanor, however, didn't live to see that particular drama unfold, having passed away in 1204 at the age of 82, a ripe old age by medieval standards and a testament to her indomitable spirit. Eleanor's later years were a masterclass in resilience, a study in how to wield power from the shadows. Her story is one of a woman who refused to be defined by her circumstances, a queen who forged her own path and left an indelible mark on history. She was more than a medieval monarch. She was a visionary leader, a political strategist whose influence transcended the limitations of her time. And as the final chapter of her life drew to a close, Eleanor of Aquitaine left behind a legacy that continues to resonate through the ages. But don't think for a second that Eleanor's tale ends here. Her influence lives on, a beacon of strength and strategy that future generations would draw upon. Her life was a tapestry of triumphs, trials, and tenacity, woven into the very fabric of European history. As we continue to explore the ripple effects of her actions, it's clear that Eleanor was not just a queen of her time. She was a trailblazer for all time. So, as we prepare to delve into the final act of this epic saga, remember that the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine is not just a tale from the past. It's a timeless reminder of the power of intelligence, determination, and a little bit of audacity. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. With Eleanor of Aquitaine's story, we're not just closing a history book, we're shutting the cover on an epic saga of power, ambition, and a touch of medieval Machiavellianism. Eleanor wasn't just a queen. She was the blueprint for how a woman could wield power in a world that barely acknowledged their right to exist, let alone rule. As we wrap up our tale, let's delve into the gritty details of her legacy. Because while the troubadours might have sung of her as a romantic figure, The reality was as sharp and intricate as the politics she navigated. Eleanor's impact on medieval politics was seismic. She wasn't just a supporting character in the stories of the kings she married. She was often the driving force behind the throne. Consider the Angevin Empire she helped build, an empire that was, at its zenith, a patchwork quilt of territories stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. This was no small feat, and certainly no mere accident of marriage. Eleanor's strategic acumen was like a finely tuned instrument, playing the complex symphony of feudal allegiances and rivalries with a deft hand. Now, let's bust a few myths, shall we? The image of Eleanor as the damsel in distress, or the tragic romantic figure, is as appealing as it is misleading. Sure, the idea of a queen pining away in a tower has a certain dramatic flair, but Eleanor was more of a political powerhouse than a lady-in-waiting. Her time in captivity was not wasted time. It was a strategic pause. Even from her so-called prison, she was a force to be reckoned with, her influence simmering beneath the surface, ready to boil over the moment the opportunity arose. The economic context of Eleanor's reign is equally fascinating. While we often focus on the battles and betrayals, the true power lay in the purse strings. The Angevin economy was a vast machine, driven by trade, taxation, and the occasional plunder. Eleanor's management of the Duchy of Aquitaine was a masterclass in resource management, and her ability to keep the coffers full ensured her political maneuvering had the financial backing it needed. In a sense, Eleanor was the medieval CFO, ensuring the empire's economic engine was humming along, even when the political landscape was anything but stable. It's crucial to understand that Eleanor's legacy wasn't just about her immediate actions, but the long-term tectonic shifts she set in motion. She was a patron of the arts, a supporter of courtly love, and an early architect of cultural movements that would ripple through the ages. Her court was a beacon of refinement and intellectualism in an era where the line between barbarism and civilization was often blurred by the sword's edge. Troubadours and poets who flocked to her court weren't just there for the wine and song. They were part of a cultural renaissance that Eleanor championed. Yet for all this, Eleanor's story was not without its harsher realities. Her son's rebellion against Henry Roman II, her subsequent imprisonment, and the familial strife that seemed to follow her like a shadow were not just plot points in a drama, but the very real challenges of maintaining power in a volatile age. Eleanor was pragmatic, often ruthless, and always aware of the stakes. Her decisions were not made in the romantic haze of legend, but in the cold, hard light of political necessity. And let's not forget her role as the original Queen Mother, a title she wore with the gravitas of a seasoned stateswoman. Her influence over Richard the Lionheart, and later, King John, was a testament to her enduring power. Richard's exploits in the Holy Land and John's eventual signing of the Magna Carta were shaped in part by the legacy of a mother who understood the intricacies of power like few others. Eleanor's life was an intricate dance of diplomacy and dominance, a balancing act that left its mark not just on England and France, but on the whole of European history. In the end, Eleanor's legacy is not just that of a queen, but of a pioneer. She was a woman who carved out a space for herself in a world that was not built for her, and in doing so, she left a path for others to follow. Her life was a testament to the power of intellect and influence, a reminder that behind every great king, there was often a queen, pulling strings and crafting alliances with a skill that was as formidable as any sword. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not just a figure of her time. She was a trailblazer for the ages, a testament to the enduring power of wit, will, and a little bit of audacity. As we close the book on Eleanor's story, it's clear that her legacy is not confined to the dusty annals of history. It lives on in the stories we tell, the myths we perpetuate, and the lessons we draw from her life. Eleanor's tale is a reminder that history is not just the story of kings and battles, but of the people who dared to defy conventions and reshape the world in their image. And as we look back on her life, we're reminded that the greatest legacies are not just built on power and prestige, but on the courage to be more than the world expects. So here's to Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen who refused to be boxed in by the limitations of her time. Her life was a complex tapestry of triumphs and trials, woven together with threads of political cunning and personal strength. And as we wrap up this chapter, let's carry with us the lessons of her life, a life that was as bold, brilliant and breathtaking as the era she helped to shape. The year 323 BCE was a real roller coaster, and not the fun kind with safety bars and a guarantee you'll get off in one piece. No, this was more like a high-stakes game of musical chairs, where the music just stopped, and someone set the chairs on fire. Enter Alexander the Great, our headline act, who just checked out way too early at the ripe age of 32. His sudden exit left everyone asking, now what? Because Alexander's empire wasn't just any sandcastle. It stretched over 3 continents and was held together by the sheer force of his personality. With him gone, it was as if someone had pulled the plug, and the water was draining out of the tub where all the rubber ducks were generals with big dreams and bigger egos. Alexander didn't leave behind a will or a clear line of succession, which, by the way, is a rookie mistake for any empire builder. His only heirs were a half-brother with learning disabilities and an unborn son, which meant that neither was exactly ready to step into those oversized Macedonian boots. So, what did his generals do? They did what any ambitious military leaders with access to a massive empire would do. They started plotting and scheming, each one convinced they were the best person to fill Alexander's sandals. Calling it a power vacuum was like calling an erupting volcano a bit warm. The chaos that ensued is what historians like to call the Wars of the Diadochi, which is a fancy way of saying when generals attack. These weren't just any generals, mind you. They were the Diadochi, or successors, a title that came with a lot of bravado and more than little bloodshed. We're talking about big names like Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, and Cassander. If these names sound like they belong in a soap opera, you're not far off. Each one had a resume that included a significant number of battles, a decent amount of charisma, and a hefty dose of ambition. Their first order of business was the partition of Babylon, which sounds like a diplomatic solution, but in practice, it was like trying to divide a pizza among a group of hungry teenagers. It was messy, contentious, and someone always got the cheesy crust. The partition was supposed to divvy up Alexander's empire in a way that kept things stable, but spoiler alert, it didn't. Instead, it just set the stage for more conflict. The idea was to split the empire into satrapies, or provinces, with each general getting a slice of the pie. But as anyone who's ever shared a pizza knows, not all slices are created equal, and everyone wants the slice with the most pepperoni. Let's talk numbers for a second. Alexander's empire was a behemoth, covering some 2 million square miles from Greece to Egypt and all the way to the Indus River. The man's conquests were legendary, and his territories were a patchwork of different cultures, languages, and currencies. Managing this empire was like spinning plates while riding a unicycle, and Alexander had been the only one who could keep it all from crashing down. The generals, each with a different vision, weren't exactly known for their cooperative spirit, and the partition of Babylon was more of a ceasefire than a peace treaty. Antipater got Macedonia and Greece, a sort of home base for these Macedonian bigwigs. Ptolemy snagged Egypt, a move that would eventually give us the Ptolemaic dynasty, complete with Cleopatra and all that drama. Seleucus got Babylon, which was a bit like drawing the short straw, because while Babylon was historically significant, it was also a political hot potato. Then there was Antigonus, who took Asia Minor, and let's just say he was less about sharing and more about, I want it all. And they all had one thing in common. None of them were particularly interested in playing nice for the long haul. Now, if you're thinking this sounds a bit like a certain TV show minus the dragons, you're not wrong. The power plays, the betrayals, the alliances that lasted about as long as a Snapchat story, it was all very Game of Thrones-esque. In fact, you could argue that George R.R. Martin owes a debt to these ancient squabbles, though thankfully, no one had to worry about ice zombies back then. This scramble for power wasn't just a matter of personal ambition, it was about survival. The political landscape was a minefield, with each general aware that showing weakness could be an invitation for the others to pounce. Remember, these guys had spent years under Alexander, learning how to conquer and rule. They were military strategists, not diplomats, and their approach to empire building was decidedly more stabby than talky. But let's not romanticize this too much. It's easy to get caught up in the drama, but the reality was brutal. The wars that followed devastated regions, displaced countless people, and drained resources. While the generals were busy carving up the empire like a Thanksgiving turkey, The people living within those borders were the ones who really paid the price. The economy took a hit, trade routes were disrupted, and stability was a distant dream. For the average person, it was less about who was in charge, and more about whether there'd be enough food on the table. In this chaotic chess game, alliances shifted faster than a teenager's mood. Ptolemy and Seleucus would team up against Antigonus, only to later find themselves at odds with each other. Cassander and Lysimachus, another player in this high-stakes game, would join forces when it suited them, all while keeping a dagger handy just in case. Trust was in short supply, and loyalty was a currency that devalued quicker than you could say Hellenistic. The wars of the Diadochi were a series of conflicts that stretched over decades, with battles fought across the vast stretches of Alexander's once united empire. It was a period of upheaval and transformation as the old world order crumbled and a new one struggled to take shape. The legacy of these wars would be the birth of the Hellenistic kingdoms, which would carry the torch of Greek culture and influence far beyond what Alexander could have imagined. In the end, Alexander's empire was like a shooting star, brilliant, breathtaking, and all too brief. His death was the spark that ignited a powder keg of ambition and avarice, leaving behind a legacy of both remarkable cultural diffusion and devastating conflict. As the dust settled, new kingdoms rose from the chaos, each bearing the indelible mark of the man who had dared to dream of a world united under one rule. And so, the curtain had barely fallen on Alexander's grand finale when his former generals decided to stage their own chaotic encore. Welcome to the wars of the Diadochi, where military strategists turned into warlords, and the empire's map was treated like a doodle pad for their territorial ambitions. Imagine a reality show where every contestant is armed to the teeth, and the prize is a slice of the world. Let's kick things off with Antigonus Monophthalmus, the one-eyed wonder of the ancient world. Antigonus wasn't just any player. He had his sights set on the big time, and he wasn't afraid to step on a few toes, or entire armies, to get there. His ambition was as vast as the territories he aimed to control, but he had rivals who were equally determined to keep him in check. Enter Ptolemy, Seleucus, and the rest of the Diadochi crew, each with their own imperial dreams and a healthy dose of paranoia. One of the most infamous clashes in this epic saga was the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE. Picture this, armies clashing on the open plains of Phrygia, with war elephants thundering across the battlefield like prehistoric tanks. These weren't just any elephants, they were the ancient equivalent of shark and oar, towering over soldiers and terrifying horses. Antigonus, with his son Demetrius, faced off against a coalition of former allies turned adversaries. Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Cassander, all gunning for a piece of the pie. It was a battle royale where only the fiercest would survive. The logistics of such battles were mind-boggling. We're talking about tens of thousands of troops, intricate supply chains, and enough weaponry to start a small apocalypse. Antigonus's forces were formidable, boasting around 70,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, and a few dozen of those pachyderm powerhouses. But numbers alone don't win battles. Seleucus brought his own elephant brigade, courtesy of his time in India, and they proved to be the game changer. The coalition forces, despite being outnumbered, managed to outmaneuver Antigonus. In a climactic moment worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster, Antigonus fell on the battlefield, marking the end of his ambitious bid for supremacy. The aftermath of Ipsus was a seismic shift in the power dynamics of the Diadochi. Antigonus's territory was carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey, with Seleucus taking the choicest cuts, including much of Asia Minor. Ptolemy, ever the opportunist, solidified his grip on Egypt, ensuring his place in history as the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Meanwhile, Lysimachus expanded his influence into Thrace and parts of Anatolia, proving that in the Game of Thrones, it was all about grabbing what you could when you could. But let's pause for a reality check. While these generals were busy playing at empire, the real world was feeling the impact. The constant warfare drained resources, devastated the countryside, and left a trail of destruction in its wake. Economies that had once thrived under Alexander's unified rule were now fractured and struggling. Trade routes were disrupted, and cities that had been cultural hubs found themselves caught in the crossfire. For the average citizen, these wars were less about glory and more about survival. The Hellenistic period that followed was a testament to both the enduring legacy of Greek culture and the harsh realities of empire building. The new kingdoms that emerged from the Diadochi squabbles carried forward the torch of Hellenism, spreading Greek art, language, and ideas far and wide. Yet they also inherited the instability and fragmentation that came with such rapid expansion and division. As the dust settled from Ipsus, the Diadochi continued their relentless pursuit of power. Ptolemy, secure in Egypt, focused on turning Alexandria into a beacon of culture and learning. It would become the home of the Great Library, a symbol of Hellenistic intellectual achievement. Seleucus, meanwhile, founded the Seleucid Empire, stretching from the Aegean to modern-day Pakistan, though maintaining control over such a sprawling domain would prove to be as challenging as herding cats. The wars might have been over, but the power struggles were far from settled. Alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm, with former allies turning on each other at the drop of a helmet. It was a world where trust was a luxury few could afford, and every handshake came with a hidden dagger. Yet, for all the bloodshed and betrayal, there was a strange allure to this period. The Diadochi were larger-than-life figures, their stories rich with drama and intrigue. It's easy to romanticize their exploits, to see them as swashbuckling heroes in a grand historical epic. But peel back the layers of myth, and you're left with a stark reality. A tale of ambition unchecked by morality, where the real cost was paid by the countless lives caught in the crossfire. The wars of the Diadochi may have been a testament to human ambition and folly, but they also laid the groundwork for a new world order. The Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged were a blend of Greek and local cultures, a fusion that would shape the ancient world for centuries to come. It was a time of both great innovation and great instability, a period where the echoes of Alexander's dreams could still be heard, even as his empire lay in tatters. And so, the stage was set for the next act in this historical saga. The Diadochi had carved out their kingdoms, but the legacy of Alexander's conquests continued to ripple across the ancient world. The story of the Hellenistic period was far from over, with new challenges and opportunities on the horizon. As the dust began to settle, the world was left to ponder the true cost of empire, and whether the dream of a united realm had been worth the price. As the dust began to settle, the world was left to ponder the true cost of empire, and whether the dream of a united realm had been worth the price. But while historians mused over Alexander's shattered legacy, the survivors of his empire were busy stitching together new kingdoms from the tattered remnants. Enter the Hellenistic kingdoms. Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Asia, and Antigonid Macedonia was a bit like inheriting a classic car from a reckless driver. You've got to fix the dents and keep the engine running, but boy, does it have potential. First, let's swing over to Egypt, where Ptolemy I was living his best life. He grabbed Egypt in the aftermath of Babylon's partition, and it was a move of pure genius. Egypt wasn't just the land of pyramids and pharaohs, it was the breadbasket of the ancient world. The Nile River was like a supercharged irrigation system, turning the desert into fertile farmland. Under Ptolemy's rule, Egypt became the Hellenistic world's economic powerhouse, and Alexandria, his shiny new capital, was the crown jewel. It wasn't just the bustling port city that made Alexandria special. It was the epicenter of culture and learning, home to the Great Library, where the brains of the ancient world came to mingle. Ptolemy knew that to truly cement his dynasty, he needed more than just economic might. Cultural integration was key, and he played it like a maestro. He embraced Egyptian traditions, even adopting the title of pharaoh, and commissioned lavish temples to keep the local population on his side. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a come-bear moment of cultural exchange. It was a calculated strategy to maintain control. Ptolemy's Egypt was a curious blend of Greek and Egyptian elements, from the fusion of deities in the temples to the very language spoken in the streets. It was the original melting pot, long before New York made it cool. Now, if you thought the Ptolemies were the picture of stability, think again. Their family reunions could give any soap opera a run for its money. Ptolemy's descendants were notorious for their, let's say, close-knit family dynamics. Marrying your sibling wasn't just a plot twist. It was practically a family tradition, all in the name of keeping power within the bloodline. But spoiler alert, it often led to more chaos than cohesion. Imagine the holiday dinners. Next up, Let's jet over to Seleucid Asia, where Seleucus I Nicator was building an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the edge of India. That's about 3 million square miles, folks. A logistical nightmare, but also a strategist's dream. Seleucus was a savvy ruler who knew that an empire this vast required innovation and adaptability. His economic strategy was as ambitious as his territorial reach. He focused on revitalizing trade routes, connecting the East and West with a network that would make modern supply chain managers weep with envy. Seleucus was also a cultural chameleon. He established new cities, more than 20, in fact, each one a beacon of Hellenistic culture. These weren't just settlements. They were showcases of Greek architecture, complete with theaters, gymnasiums, and agoras. Yet, his empire was a mosaic of cultures, from Persians to Indians, requiring a deft touch to manage. Seleucus attempted to integrate these diverse populations through a policy of syncretism, blending Greek customs with local traditions. It was a balancing act worthy of Cirque du Soleil, and while it wasn't perfect, it was a testament to his vision of a multicultural empire. But let's not gloss over the Seleucid family's penchant for internal drama. Succession disputes were as common as sand in the desert, and family members often found themselves in a deadly game of musical thrones. If there's one thing to learn from history, it's that keeping power in the family can be as treacherous as juggling flaming swords. Finally, we arrive at Macedonia, where the Antigonid dynasty ruled over a kingdom that was both the heartland of Alexander's empire and a shadow of its former glory. Antigonus Roman II Gonatas, the grandson of Antigonus Monophthalmus, took over after the dust of the Diadochi Wars had settled, inheriting a region that was more about nostalgia than innovation. Macedonia was the land of heroes, sure, but it was also a political powder keg. The Antigonid rulers had to navigate the tricky waters of Greek politics while dealing with the constant threat of rebellion. Antigonus Roman II focused on stabilizing his realm and rebuilding its military prowess. He knew that a strong army was crucial, not just for defense, but as a tool of diplomacy. His economic policies were rooted in consolidating power at home while keeping a wary eye on his neighbors. Yet, despite his efforts, Macedonia was often the underdog in the Hellenistic power plays, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall from grace. And so, the Hellenistic kingdoms emerged as both heirs and innovators, each attempting to channel the spirit of Alexander while forging their own paths. The economic strategies they employed, from agricultural expansion to trade network enhancement, were critical to their survival. Cultural integration wasn't just an ideal. It was a necessity in empires that spanned continents and embraced countless ethnicities. As we delve into the twisted family trees of these dynasties, it's clear that maintaining the illusion of unity was as much about spectacle as it was about strategy. The Hellenistic rulers were masters of pageantry, blending divine right and familial legitimacy in a show of power that was as much theater as it was governance. And yet, beneath the grandeur and the glory, there was a harsh reality to contend with. The Hellenistic world was a place of constant flux, where stability was fleeting and power elusive. The dream of empire was intoxicating, but the cost was steep, and the legacies left behind were as complex as the rulers who forged them. As we continue to peel back the layers of this era, it's clear that the echoes of Alexander's vision resounded through each kingdom, even as they diverged from his path. The story of the Hellenistic kingdoms is far from over, with new chapters yet to unfold, and the intrigue of ancient power plays still captivating our imagination. Stay tuned, because the saga continues. As we continue to peel back the layers of this era, it's clear that the echoes of Alexander's vision resounded through each kingdom, even as they diverged from his path. The story of the Hellenistic kingdoms is far from over, with new chapters yet to unfold, and the intrigue of ancient power plays still captivating our imagination. Stay tuned, because the saga continues. Now, let's dive into the golden age of the Hellenistic period, where culture and science didn't just flourish, they threw a wild party. Picture Alexandria, the city that was basically the New York of the ancient world, minus the pizza, but with all the hustle and bustle. Founded by Alexander himself and polished by Ptolemy's dynasty, Alexandria became the crown jewel of Hellenistic culture. It was a melting pot where Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and countless other influences mixed like a well-shaken cocktail. And at the heart of it, the great library stood like an intellectual theme park, or so the legend goes. Let's start with some myth-busting, shall we? The Great Library of Alexandria is often portrayed in our minds as this colossal wonder, where scrolls were stacked to the sky, and philosophers wandered the halls like rock stars at a music festival. In reality, while it was indeed a hub of knowledge, its grandeur has been a bit exaggerated through the ages. Sure, it housed perhaps hundreds of thousands of scrolls, but the idea of a pristine, organized collection is more myth than fact. It was more like a chaotic Google search before computers were a thing. Scrolls were copied, borrowed, and sometimes lost, and the cataloging system might have been as confusing as a teenager's bedroom. The library's true genius lay in its role as a research center, where scholars from all over the Mediterranean came to debate, discuss, and occasionally throw shade at each other's theories. Speaking of scholars, the Hellenistic period was like a talent show of epic proportions. You had intellectual heavyweights like Euclid, the father of geometry, whose axioms still haunt math students today. Then there was Eratosthenes, who was so bored one day he decided to measure Earth's circumference with nothing but a couple of sticks and some serious brain power. Spoiler alert. He was astonishingly accurate, with an error margin of just a few hundred miles. And let's not forget Archimedes, the guy who shouted Eureka in his bathtub, presumably startling the neighbors, after figuring out water displacement. His brilliance extended far beyond bathtub epiphanies, ranging from war machines to the Archimedean screw, an invention that's still used today to move water uphill. While these intellectual titans were busy changing the world, the arts were having their own renaissance. The Hellenistic period saw a shift from the idealized forms of classical Greece to more expressive and dynamic representations. Sculptures like the Laocoon group epitomized this new style, capturing human agony with such intensity that it could rival any modern horror movie. It was art that spoke to the raw, messy business of being human, not just the polished perfection of gods. Philosophy, too, took center stage, with schools of thought popping up like philosophical Starbucks. The Stoics, led by Zeno of Citium, preached that virtue was the only true good, and everything else, wealth, health, even Starbucks, was just gravy. Meanwhile, the Epicureans, followers of Epicurus, argued that pleasure was the highest good, but before you imagine toga parties, know that they meant a life of modest pleasures and thoughtful reflection. Then there were the skeptics, who were basically the ancient world's internet trolls, questioning everything just to keep everyone on their intellectual toes. But why all this intellectual and cultural explosion? Well, prestige played a huge part. For the ruling elites of the Hellenistic kingdoms, patronizing the arts and sciences was a way to flex their cultural muscles. Alexandria wasn't just a city, it was a statement. It said, "Look at us, we're not just about power and wealth, we're about brains too." The Ptolemies poured resources into the library, and the Mausian, think of it as a proto-university, not purely out of curiosity, but as a status symbol. It was like having the biggest, baddest collection of NFTs in the ancient world, but with actual intellectual value. Economically, this period was a bit like a heartbeat monitor, ups and downs all over the place. The Hellenistic world was a mosaic of economies, each kingdom trying to outshine the other. Trade was the name of the game, and the Mediterranean was its playground. Sea routes connected distant lands, from the olive groves of Greece to the spice markets of India. Coins minted with the faces of rulers were not just currency, but propaganda on a small, portable scale. Each coin was a tiny testament to the ruler's power, a little piece of metal that whispered, "Remember who's in charge." Yet, beneath the glittering surface, tensions simmered. The Hellenistic kingdoms were like a dysfunctional family reunion, everyone smiling for the group photo, but ready to bicker at the slightest provocation. Political alliances were as fickle as celebrity relationships, and warfare was never far from the horizon. The constant jockeying for power meant that the average citizen was often caught in the crossfire of these grand ambitions. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, the Hellenistic period left an indelible mark on history. It was a time of both convergence and divergence, where cultures clashed and collaborated, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. It was a world where ideas flowed as freely as the wine at a Dionysian feast, and where the pursuit of knowledge was as intoxicating as the finest vintage. And while we romanticize the brilliance and grandeur, let's not forget the reality check. The Hellenistic period was as much a testament to human ego as it was to human ingenuity. The pursuit of glory often came with a hefty price tag, paid in the currency of conflict and strife. Yet, amidst the turmoil, the seeds of modern thought were sown, setting the stage for future generations to harvest. As we continue our journey through this fascinating era, the tapestry of the Hellenistic period unfolds with all its vibrant colors and intricate patterns. The cultural and scientific achievements of this time still resonate today, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, brilliance can shine through. So, stay tuned, because the tale of the Hellenistic world is far from finished, and there are plenty more twists and turns to explore in this epic saga. As the tapestry of the Hellenistic period unfolds, let's zoom in on the grand finale of this ancient drama. By the time the Romans strolled onto the scene, the Hellenistic kingdoms were like exhausted marathon runners, gasping for breath at mile 26. The once mighty successors of Alexander's empire had spent centuries dazzling the world with their cultural fireworks and philosophical revelations. But behind the glittering facade was a story of gradual decline, a slow-motion train wreck that even the most optimistic of their rulers couldn't halt. Let's start with good old Ptolemaic Egypt, which had been living the high life for a couple of centuries. By the time Cleopatra Roman VII took the throne in 51 BCE, Egypt was hanging onto its independence by a thread, like a soap opera character refusing to exit stage left. Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, was a political powerhouse with an IQ to match. She spoke multiple languages and had the charisma of a modern-day celebrity, but her reign was marked by the Roman Empire's looming shadow. Egypt was the breadbasket of Rome, and the Romans were more interested in grain shipments than Cleopatra's epic love affairs with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. In 30 BCE, not long after Cleopatra and Antony's dramatic defeat at the Battle of Actium, Egypt fell to Rome like a ripe fruit. It was less of a conquest and more of a handover wrapped in a toga. Octavian, later known as Augustus, waltzed in and transformed Egypt into a Roman province. Cleopatra's suicide, famously involving a snake and a basket of figs, marked the end of an era. The Ptolemaic legacy was sealed, not with a bang, but a whisper as Egypt quietly slipped into the Roman fold. Meanwhile, over in the Seleucid Empire, chaos was the dish of the day. By the 2nd century BCE, the once mighty empire was a patchwork quilt unraveling at the seams. Internal strife, dynastic squabbles, and external threats had whittled away its power. In 63 BCE, the Seleucid Empire was officially put out of its misery by the Romans, who annexed what was left of its territory. It was the political equivalent of putting a sickly horse out of its misery, and Pompey the Great, the Roman general, was only too happy to oblige. The Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia didn't fare much better. By the time the Romans were done, Macedonia had become a Roman province in 146 BCE, after the Battle of Pydna. The once proud heartland of Alexander's empire was now just another cog in the Roman machinery. The Antigonid rulers, who had once juggled alliances and rivalries with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat, found themselves outmaneuvered by Rome's relentless expansion. In absorbing the Hellenistic world, Rome wasn't just acquiring territory, it was inheriting a legacy of culture and knowledge that would shape its own identity. The Romans were the ultimate cultural magpies, picking up the best of what the Greeks had to offer and making it their own. Greek art, architecture, and philosophy became the bedrock of Roman culture. The Romans might have conquered the Hellenistic kingdoms, but culturally, it was Greece that conquered Rome. Let's take a moment to debunk the myth of Alexander's dream of unity. The romantic notion of a world under one rule was as much a pipe dream as world peace in a boxing ring. Alexander's vision was a dazzling spectacle, a fireworks display of ambition and conquest, but the reality was far messier. His empire was a mosaic of cultures, languages, and peoples, and the glue holding it together was more spit than cement. The Hellenistic period was less about unity and more about the creative chaos that followed the implosion of Alexander's empire. And yet, despite the unfulfilled dreams and the relentless march of Roman legions, the Hellenistic era left an indelible mark on history. It was a time when the world was a laboratory of ideas, where Greek culture spread like wildfire, igniting minds from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Indus. The Hellenistic kingdoms were the crucible in which art, science, and philosophy were forged, and their legacy continues to resonate today. In art, the Hellenistic period broke the mold of classical restraint, embracing emotion and movement. Sculptures like the Winged Victory of Samothrace and the Venus de Milo captured the dynamism and grace that would inspire generations of artists. Science and philosophy flourished, laying the groundwork for everything from astronomy to ethics. The Hellenistic scholars were the intellectual rock stars of their time, their ideas rippling through the centuries like echoes in a canyon. Politics, too, bore the imprint of the Hellenistic age. The concept of the city-state evolved into a more complex tapestry of kings and empires, a foreshadowing of the globalized world we navigate today. The Hellenistic period was a masterclass in diplomacy and statecraft, albeit one with a rather high body count. It was a time when alliances were as fragile as glass, and power was a slippery eel, hard to grasp and harder to hold. So, as we wrap up this saga of ambition, intrigue, and cultural brilliance, let's tip our hats to the Hellenistic kingdoms. They were the unruly heirs of Alexander's empire, each struggling to live up to the legend while forging their own identities. Theirs was a world of contradictions, a place where empires rose and fell, where brilliant minds reshaped knowledge, and where the dream of unity flickered like a candle in the wind. In the end, the Hellenistic period was a testament to the resilience of human creativity and the enduring power of ideas. It was a time when the world was both smaller and larger than it had ever been, a place where the echoes of Alexander's ambition could still be heard, whispering across the ages. As we let the curtain fall on this chapter of history, we find ourselves inspired by the brilliance and humbled by the hubris of those who dared to dream of a world united under one rule. And while Alexander's empire may have crumbled, the legacy of the Hellenistic kingdoms continues to shape our world, a vivid reminder that even in chaos, there is beauty to be found. The ancient Greeks didn't just dabble in creating structures, they practically invented the architectural selfie. They knew how to make a building look good from every angle, and let's be honest, they had style that would make even the most jaded Instagram influencer green with envy. But before you start picturing toga-clad architects sketching blueprints on papyrus, let's zoom in on what really made Greek architecture the absolute rock star of its time. Those iconic columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Now if you're thinking, columns, really? Just remember, in ancient Greece, these weren't just decorative sticks holding up a roof. They were statements practically shouting, "Look at me, I'm fabulous." The Doric columns, with their no-nonsense, sturdy design, were the architectural equivalent of a power suit, simple yet commanding. They were the go-to choice for many temples, including the Parthenon, that little number on the Athenian Acropolis which wasn't just a building. It was a 500-year-old flex. Built around 447 BCE, the Parthenon stands as a testament to the Greeks' obsession with symmetry and proportion. It's like they had a Pythagorean theorem for everything. Then there's the Ionic column, the middle child of the column family, with its scroll-like volutes. It's like the ancient version of a hipster with a handlebar mustache, trying to be unique but still approachable. You'd find these columns in places like the Temple of Athena Nike, where they added a touch of elegance and a dash of flair. The Greeks were nothing if not innovative, and they knew that adding a bit of personality to their structures could go a long way in asserting cultural dominance. Finally, the Corinthian columns, which are so extra they make a peacock look understated. Their ornate capitals adorned with acanthus leaves, they scream opulence and grandeur. These columns didn't see much action in Greece itself, but gained superstar status in Roman architecture. It's almost as if the Romans saw these fancy columns and thought, yes, more is more. But why did the Greeks put so much emphasis on these architectural showstoppers? The answer, unsurprisingly, lies in politics and economics. Because what's history without a little intrigue? Pericles, the Athenian statesman with ambitions bigger than his city's treasury, spearheaded a building program that would have put even the most ambitious Hollywood set designers to shame. Between 460 and 429 BCE, Athens was transformed into a city of marble and dreams, with costs that could rival the budget of a Marvel movie. The Parthenon alone cost roughly 469 talents, which, in today's money, is enough to make a billionaire blink twice. Pericles wasn't just building for the sake of aesthetics. He was crafting a message. Each column, each stone, every gleaming facade was a declaration of Athens' power and prestige. It was about showing the neighboring city-states and the world that Athens was the cultural and political heart of Greece. The columns were more than support structures. They were the embodiment of ideals like strength, beauty, and democracy. It's like the Greek architects were saying, not only do we have the brains to build this, but we also have the brawn to back it up. This wasn't just a vanity project, though. It was a calculated move to solidify Athens' status and influence. The citizens, funded by the Delian League's treasury, were effectively investing in a massive PR campaign. Sure, it was a bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul, since the funds were originally meant for defense. But when has a little financial juggling ever stopped anyone in politics? The Greeks also knew the power of a good myth. They weren't just building temples. They were creating spaces where mythology met reality. The Parthenon wasn't just a temple to Athena. It was a narrative in stone, a place where gods walked among mortals. This blending of myth and architecture helped cement the Greeks' cultural legacy. In a world where stories were currency, the Greeks had a bottomless bank account. In essence, ancient Greek architecture was about more than just building structures. It was about building identities, legacies, and dreams. Those columns weren't just marble and stone. They were the backbone of a civilization that knew how to make a statement and how to make it stick. So next time you see a column or a facade that makes you pause, remember, the Greeks did it first, and they did it with style. Now, speaking of making a statement, let's dive into the Parthenon, the crown jewel of Athenian ambition. Built between 447 and 432 BCE, this marble marvel didn't just pop up overnight. It was the result of some serious planning and a workforce that could rival a modern city's population. We're talking about tens of thousands of laborers. And let's not ignore the elephants in the room, an estimated 469 talents of silver. In today's terms, think of it as the GDP of a small island nation or the cost of a particularly lavish Hollywood blockbuster. But before we start imagining construction workers with chisels and hard hats, let's bust a few myths about this ancient wonder. First, the speed. Built in a mere 15 years, the Parthenon was a sprint by ancient standards, considering that other temples took decades or even centuries. Were the Athenians overachievers, or was there something more at play? Well, with Pericles at the helm, it was less about speed and more about a strategic display of Athenian prowess. The quicker it went up, the faster Athens could flex its cultural muscle. It was like the city was saying, look at us. Not only can we build something magnificent, but we can do it while you're still figuring out how to sharpen your chisels. Yet, behind this legendary speed lies a less glamorous truth. Slave labor was a significant part of this workforce. While we love to romanticize the Parthenon as a beacon of democracy and art, it's crucial to remember that many hands that built it weren't free. Slaves, alongside skilled artisans and laborers, toiled for years to bring this vision to life. It's a harsh reminder that even the most beautiful achievements can have a dark underbelly. And let's talk about the Parthenon's mythic status. Sure, it's been hailed as the pinnacle of classical architecture, a symbol of Athenian democracy, and a testament to human creativity. But did it really change the world? In reality, its impact was more about perception than practicality. It was a grand statement of power, a marble billboard declaring Athens' cultural dominance. The Parthenon didn't house political debates or democratic assemblies. It was a temple, a sacred space dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess. Its true power lay in its ability to inspire, to evoke a sense of wonder and awe. Yet, let's not be too cynical. The Parthenon's legacy is undeniable. It has withstood wars, fires, and even an explosion in 1687, serving as a resilient symbol of human ingenuity. Its enduring presence reminds us of the heights we can achieve when creativity meets ambition. But as we admire its beauty, let's not forget the human cost behind its construction. In the economic context of ancient Greece, the construction of the Parthenon was a massive investment. Funded by the Delian League's treasury, it was a political move as much as an architectural one. Pericles wasn't just building a temple, it was cementing Athens' place as the leader of the Greek world. But with great power comes great responsibility, or in this case, great debt. The financial strain of such grand projects eventually took its toll on Athens, contributing to its decline. It's a classic case of keeping up with the Joneses, ancient style. So, was the Parthenon worth it? In terms of cultural legacy, absolutely. But if you were an Athenian taxpayer footing the bill, you might have had second thoughts. The Parthenon stands as a reminder that art and ambition often come with a price. It's a testament to the human spirit, but also a sobering look at the realities of power and politics. As we continue exploring the wonders of ancient Greek architecture, let's keep in mind that behind every grand facade lies a complex story of triumph and toil. Stay tuned as we unravel more of these stories, where myth meets reality in the most unexpected ways. But let's swivel our gaze away from the marble temples and their political theatrics to a different kind of stage, the ancient Greek theaters that were the real drama queens of their time. These weren't just places to catch the latest tragedy by some guy named Sophocles. These were the social media platforms of ancient Greece. Forget Instagram. The Greeks had the theater of Epidaurus, where a whisper on stage could reach the back row without a microphone in sight. If you've ever struggled to hear your favorite band at a concert, you'll appreciate that the Greeks nailed acoustics 2 millennia before our time. Take the theater of Epidaurus, for instance. Built around 340 BCE, it's still standing as a testament to Greek architectural genius, with a seating capacity of up to 14,000, because why not invite the whole city? This theater was all about inclusivity. And let's talk about those acoustics. Modern sound engineers have studied its design with the kind of awe usually reserved for Nobel Prize winners. The secret: a perfect blend of limestone seats and clever geometry that filtered out background noise and enhanced sound clarity. It's like they had an ancient sound system, minus the electricity. But why were these theaters so important? In ancient Greece, they weren't just venues for entertainment. They were the meeting grounds of culture, politics, and even religion. Imagine a place where you could watch a comedy, debate politics, and worship the gods, all in a day's work. It was multitasking at its finest. The Greeks understood that if you wanted to sway public opinion or make a cultural statement, you needed a grand stage. Literally, these theaters were where playwrights like Aristophanes and Euripides aired society's dirty laundry in the form of satire and tragedy. They were the Jon Stewarts and John Olivers of their day, using humor and drama to critique the world around them. And let's not gloss over the economic side of things. Building a theater wasn't cheap, and in a society where wealth often equated to influence, funding one was a way to gain social capital. Wealthy patrons, aspiring for a slice of immortality, would finance these grand structures, leaving their mark on history while rubbing elbows with the elite. It was a win-win. Patrons got prestige, and the public got culture. Speaking of rubbing elbows, these theaters were also the original social networks. Before Facebook events and Twitter threads, the Greeks had festivals like the city Dionysia, where citizens gathered to experience the latest plays. It wasn't just about the performance. It was about being seen, making connections, and engaging in the civic life of the city. The entire community came together, from the highest-ranking officials to the average citizen, creating a melting pot of ideas and interactions. It's as if the entire city decided to go on a collective cultural binge-watch. And let's not forget the political undertones. These theaters were as much about politics as they were about art. In a society where democracy was still finding its feet, the theater became a platform for political discourse. Playwrights could address contemporary issues under the guise of fiction, critiquing leadership, societal norms, and ethical dilemmas. It was like a public opinion poll played out on stage, complete with dramatic flair and poetic dialogue. Now, if you're wondering how they managed to fill these massive spaces, let's bust a few myths. It wasn't just the allure of a good play that drew crowds. It was the communal experience and the chance to engage in civic duty. Attendance was considered a public service, and sometimes even subsidized by the state for those who couldn't afford a ticket. Think of it as ancient Greece's version of free movie night, but with a side of philosophical debate. While we marvel at the grandeur of these ancient theaters, it's vital to remember that not everything was as idyllic as it seems. The narratives might have been poetic, but the reality was harsh. Slavery, gender inequality, and political corruption were rampant, and the theater was one of the few places where these issues could be aired, albeit indirectly. It was a space where the oppressed could find a voice, albeit through the mouths of actors and playwrights. The theaters of ancient Greece were more than just architectural feats. They were the beating heart of society, a place where art, politics, and community converged. They remind us that while the methods of communication have evolved, the need for a communal space to share stories and ideas remains timeless. As we continue to unravel the wonders of ancient Greek architecture, let's carry with us the understanding that behind every stone and every stage, there's a story waiting to be told. A story of human ambition, creativity, and the unyielding desire to connect. So, as we bid adieu to the grand drama of ancient theaters, let's pivot to something a bit more structured, into the urban planning genius of the ancient Greeks. You know, those folks who seem to have a knack for turning chaos into order with a flair that would make Marie Kondo proud. While the rest of the world was still figuring out how not to trip over their own huts, the Greeks were busy laying out cities with the precision of a Swiss watch. Cue the spotlight on Miletus, the rock star of ancient urban planning. This Ionian city wasn't just a bunch of buildings thrown together in the hopes they'd make sense eventually. Nope, Miletus was meticulously planned, with a grid pattern that predates modern urban layouts by, a couple of millennia. Imagine that. Streets intersecting at right angles, forming perfect city blocks. It's enough to make any modern city planner weep with joy, or envy. Now, before we go off romanticizing these straight lines as a stroke of pure genius, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of why the Greeks were so obsessed with tidiness. Was it an early form of OCD? Perhaps, but it was probably more about practicality and politics. You see, a grid plan wasn't just about looking neat. It was about efficiency, control, and of course, making a statement. Because if there's one thing the ancient Greeks loved more than their guards, it was showing off their smarts. The mind behind Miletus' layout was Hippodamus, the ancient world's answer to a master city planner. Around the 5th century BCE, Hippodamus took the helm and decided that Miletus would be more than just a place to live. It would be a blueprint for future cities. His plan was simple yet revolutionary. Equal-sized blocks, wide streets, and designated areas for public spaces, markets, and residential zones. It was urban planning 101 before anyone even knew what urban planning was. But why did this matter? Well, aside from creating a city that was a breeze to navigate, no more getting lost on your way to the agora, this grid system was a reflection of a society striving for balance and democracy. The equal distribution of land mirrored the Greeks' philosophical ideals, like equality and fairness. Every citizen, theoretically, had access to the same resources and opportunities, at least in terms of real estate. Of course, let's not get too carried away with the idea of ancient Greek utopia. While the streets were orderly, society was anything but. Beneath the facade of equality lay the usual suspects: social hierarchies, economic disparities, and political power plays. Not everyone was sipping wine and discussing philosophy in their neatly planned homes. Slaves and women, for instance, weren't exactly enjoying the fruits of this urban Eden. And here's the kicker. While Miletus might have had the grid thing down, it didn't completely eliminate the chaos of city life. Sure, it might have spared them from the modern curse of traffic jams, but that's only because the ancient Greeks hadn't invented the wheel for city transport yet. The real traffic jam was in the agora, where ideas, trade, and debates collided in a cacophony of human interaction. Yet, despite the less-than-perfect reality, Miletus set a precedent. It was an ancient experiment in city planning that future civilizations would look to, from the Romans, who loved a good grid, to modern metropolises. The socio-political implications were profound. A well-organized city was not just efficient, it was a symbol of power and sophistication. It broadcast to the world that its inhabitants were civilized, forward-thinking, and most importantly, in control. But let's not gloss over the economic realities that made such planning possible. Building a city in perfect alignment wasn't cheap, and it certainly wasn't quick. It required resources, labor, and surprise, a hefty amount of drachmas. Patronage from wealthy citizens or the state was essential. It was a classic case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, where the patrons got recognition and influence, and the city got its gleaming new layout. If a city could be a work of art, Miletus was a masterpiece. However, not all cities adopted this approach. The grid plan was practical, but it wasn't always feasible, especially in areas with challenging terrain or existing settlements. And let's face it, sometimes people just didn't want their lives boxed in by too many rules. The Greeks were pioneers, but they were also pragmatic. They knew when to hold the line and when to let go. So, while the idea of ancient Greek urban planning might conjure images of perfect symmetry, the reality was a tad messier. It was a blend of innovation, necessity, and a dash of the old-fashioned human desire to leave a mark on the world. And leave a mark they did. The grid system of Miletus didn't just influence urban planning. It shaped the way cities would be built for centuries to come. As we wrap up this architectural escapade, let's remember that behind every straight line and right angle was a society striving to impose order on chaos, to turn the unpredictable into something manageable. The ancient Greeks might not have solved all of life's problems with their urban grids, but they sure did set a foundation, literally and figuratively, for the cities of the future. Stick around as we continue to unravel the tales of ancient Greek ingenuity. Like any good story, there's always more beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. The Greek architectural saga doesn't end with a neatly tied ribbon on a Parthenon column. No, it cascaded through the centuries, leaving breadcrumbs that the Romans and later the Renaissance masters devoured with relish. The Romans, those ambitious builders with an appetite for grandeur as expansive as their empire, took Greek architecture and cranked it up to 11. They saw those Corinthian columns all dressed up with acanthus leaves and said, "Why stop at temples? Let's put these bad boys everywhere." Unlike the Greeks, who were all about moderation, well, except when it came to symposiums, the Romans believed that more was more. Their architectural feats were like Hollywood sequels, bigger, louder, and designed to leave an impression. Take the Pantheon in Rome, built around 126 AD, with its massive dome and Corinthian columns. It was like the Romans were saying, "We'll see your Parthenon and raise you an Oculus." The Pantheon's dome, by the way, spans 142 feet, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. Talk about flexing those engineering muscles. But let's not pretend the Roman borrowing was all sunshine and marble. The Romans were also pragmatic, using concrete, a Roman innovation, to build faster and more efficiently than the Greeks ever dreamed possible. Concrete allowed them to construct on a scale the Greeks could only imagine, and it was cheaper, which was a big plus when you're busy conquering half the known world. Economic context of Roman architecture was all about cost-effectiveness and speed, because when you're building an empire, there was time to wait for marble to be quarried. Fast forward to the Renaissance, when Europe was rediscovering the classical world like it had found a long-lost playlist of bangers. Renaissance architects were like kids in a candy store, giddy with the treasures of antiquity. They looked at Greek temples and thought, "We can build that, but let's add some flair." Cue the birth of neoclassical architecture, where symmetry, columns, and domes came back into vogue, only this time with a side of humanism. Filippo Brunelleschi, the man behind Florence's famous Duomo, was one such architect who took a leaf, or perhaps a scroll, out of the Greek playbook. He combined Greek and Roman elements with his own innovative twist, creating structures that were as much about form as they were about function. The Renaissance was a time of rebirth, but it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about rediscovering ideals of beauty, proportion, and harmony that the Greeks had mastered centuries before. The Renaissance architects were like artists remixing a classic track for a new era. Yet, before we get too swept up in this architectural love fest, let's unpack the reality behind these romanticized stone giants. Greek architecture, for all its grandeur, wasn't just about beauty. It was a product of its time, shaped by politics, economics, and social dynamics. The Parthenon, that symbol of democratic ideals, was built with funds that were supposed to defend the Delian League. Talk about creative accounting. And those magnificent theaters. They were as much about controlling the populace as they were about entertaining them. The Greeks were masters of crafting narratives, but behind every marble column lurked the shadows of inequality and exploitation. Slavery was rampant, and the spoils of war often funded these architectural ventures. The stunning facades we admire today were built on the backs of those who had no say in their construction. Romanticizing Greek architecture without acknowledging these realities is like admiring a painting without recognizing the darkness in the artist's life. As we pivot to the modern era, the legacy of Greek architecture continues to shape our built environment. It's in the neoclassical facades of Washington, D.C., the stately columns of banks and courthouses, and even in the suburban homes with their faux columns and pediments. Greek architecture has become shorthand for stability, democracy, and cultural refinement. It's the architectural equivalent of a power suit, timeless and authoritative. But let's not forget that, while the aesthetics are enduring, the context has shifted. Today, the columns might be fiberglass, not marble, and the ideals they represent are more aspirational than actual. Yet, the influence of Greek architecture is undeniable. It's a testament to human creativity and ambition, a reminder that we're capable of creating beauty even amidst chaos. As we wrap up our architectural odyssey, let's take a moment to reflect on the duality of these ancient structures. They are relics of a world that was at once striving for perfection and mired in imperfection. They inspire awe, but also a critical examination of the society that built them. In a way, they hold up a mirror to our own world, challenging us to consider the legacy we're building today. In the end, Greek architecture is more than stone and symmetry. It's a story of human aspiration, of reaching for the heavens while being firmly rooted in the earth. It's about the balance between idealism and pragmatism, beauty and brutality, innovation and tradition. So next time you pass by a building with a Corinthian column or a Doric portico, remember, it's not just a nod to the past, but a conversation with it, a reminder that history is never just history, but a living dialogue that shapes our present and future. The sun rises over the sultry, sea-kissed cityscape of Carthage, casting long shadows that stretch across cobbled streets. The air is thick with the smell of fresh fish, your uninvited alarm clock for the day. Welcome to Carthage in 300 BCE, where the Mediterranean breeze carries a cacophony of traders' voices, each trying to outshout the other in a tongue-twisting babel of Phoenician, Greek, and a smattering of Latin. If you thought modern-day stock markets were intense, this is ancient chaos with a side of salted mackerel. Your day kicks off in the vibrant heart of the city, a place that feels like an ancient Costco had a wild night with a Middle Eastern bazaar. The marketplace, or agora, is the pulse of Carthaginian life. It's a bustling hive of activity where traders hawk everything from olive oil to elephant ivory. Yes, they had elephants, and no, you won't find those in your local supermarket. Here, copper coins clink in pockets and palms, a reminder that Carthage's economy was as spicy as its famed harissa. These coins were the currency of choice, and they are more like little bronze frisbees than the bills you're used to. Worth about a day's labor for some, they're the key to unlocking the various delights and necessities on offer. Let's talk numbers, because let's face it, nothing says thriving economy like a bit of math. Carthage, at its peak, was home to about 400,000 people. That's roughly the population of modern-day Miami, packed into a city that was the ancient version of a tech hub. Carthage was the Silicon Valley of the Mediterranean, and their tech was trade. The city owed its prosperity to a sprawling network of trade routes snaking across the Mediterranean Sea, connecting North Africa with the coasts of Spain, Sicily, and beyond. They didn't have Google Maps back then, but they knew their way around a sea chart. But don't let the romantic image of bustling trade fool you. While the elite merchant class was living it up, the cost of this prosperity was high, especially if you weren't invited to the elite party. The vast majority of Carthaginians were not sipping fine wine on their sun-drenched terraces. Most of them were grinding away, literally and metaphorically, in workshops making textiles, pottery, and other goods, or toiling as laborers on the docks. If you were a commoner, your average day involved more sweat and less glamour than the romantic myths suggest. Yet, there's a certain allure to Carthage's hustle. The city's strategic location allowed it to control the narrow passage between Sicily and Tunisia, essentially the toll booth of the Mediterranean. This position made Carthage a powerhouse, but it also painted a target on its back. Cue the Romans, who eyed Carthage's thriving ports and bustling markets with the envy of a younger sibling eyeing an older sibling's toy. But enough about geopolitics for now. As you navigate the market's labyrinth, you can't help but notice the sheer variety of goods. There's purple dye from Tyre, a luxury so exclusive that it was basically the Gucci of its time. You might even spot a trader from Iberia peddling silver, or a Greek merchant offering a selection of fine Athenian pottery. Each item tells a story of a journey across turbulent seas and the relentless pursuit of profit. It's a testament to Carthage's ingenuity and its ability to bring the world to its doorstep. While the marketplace thrives on the surface, there's a darker undercurrent at play. The wealth that fills Carthage's coffers often comes at the expense of those who sail its ships or craft its goods. Slavery is the not-so-hidden engine driving this economic machine. Enslaved people, captured in war or bought at market, are the invisible hands that keep the wheels of trade turning. It's a brutal reminder that the splendor of ancient Carthage shines brightest for those at the top. As the sun climbs higher, you continue exploring, weaving through crowds and dodging the more enthusiastic sales pitches. You might even catch a glimpse of the city's famed harbor, a marvel of engineering with its dual docks, one for military ships and another for commercial vessels. It's a bit like having separate lanes for Ferraris and cargo trucks, designed to keep the business of war and the business of trade running smoothly. This dual harbor setup was a feat of logistics and architecture, showcasing Carthage's knack for blending practicality with grandeur. Despite its reliance on trade and maritime prowess, Carthage is not without its cultural charms. The city is a melting pot, with influences from across the Mediterranean leaving their mark. From the architectural styles borrowed from the Greeks to the religious practices influenced by the Egyptians, Carthage is a testament to cultural fusion long before the term was trendy. You might hear a priest of Baal Hammon calling the faithful to worship, the city's patron god who, despite his terrifying stone visage, is quite popular with the locals. But before you get too comfortable sipping date wine and soaking in the culture, remember that Carthage is a city of contrasts, where opulence meets oppression, and prosperity often comes with a hefty price tag. As the day wears on, you're left pondering the paradoxes of this ancient powerhouse, where fortunes are made and lost by the whims of trade winds and the tides of history. As the sun hits its zenith and the marketplace's cacophony begins to simmer down, let's switch gears and delve into the political pulse of Carthage. This wasn't just the land of merchants and mariners. It was a hotbed of power plays and political intrigue that would make any modern House of Cards episode look like a playground spat. Forget the romanticized vision of a city solely driven by trade. Carthage was a sprawling machine fueled by power dynamics, where the stakes were as high as a Phoenician mast. At the heart of this political beast was the Council of 104, a governing body that sounds more like an overly large dinner party than a political institution. This council was the powerhouse of Carthaginian politics, wielding its influence with a deftness that rivaled any modern oligarchy. It was less about the people's voice and more about maintaining the status quo among the elite. Imagine a VIP section of a nightclub, but instead of bottle service, they're serving political decrees and strategic decisions. Now, let's bust some myths about this so-called democratic dream. While it might seem like a precursor to modern governance, the Council of 104 was more inclined to operate behind closed doors, where deals were struck and alliances forged in the shadows. Forget your idyllic visions of democracy. This was oligarchy with a capital O. These guys were the real-life puppeteers, pulling strings with the finesse of a maestro conducting a symphony of power. But why 104, you ask? Well, it wasn't because they liked even numbers. This seemingly arbitrary figure was a reflection of the complex political structure designed to balance power among influential families. Power sharing was the name of the game, and every seat was a strategic move on Carthage's grand chessboard. It's a setup that would make Machiavelli proud, even if it meant that your average Joe had about as much say in governance as a goldfish in a fishbowl. And speaking of strategic moves, let's talk about Carthage's naval prowess, or at least the myth of it. Sure, Carthage was the big fish in the Mediterranean pond, but maintaining such a maritime empire was no small feat. It required a staggering amount of resources and manpower. Think more than just a fleet of ships, but an entire maritime infrastructure. Picture this. About 200 ships at the height of their power, each with a crew of roughly 200 men. Do the math, and you're looking at a veritable army of sailors, rowers, and craftsmen keeping these vessels seaworthy. This isn't just about having a navy, it's about sustaining it. The labor force behind these ships was a mix of free citizens, hired mercenaries, and enslaved people, all rowing to the beat of Carthage's ambitious drum. It's a brutal reminder that behind every glorious military campaign is a network of unsung laborers, the silent gears in the war machine. And let's not forget the logistics. Feeding, housing, and supplying these men was a colossal undertaking, one that required meticulous planning and a hefty chunk of the city's resources. Yet, despite the grandeur of their maritime reputation, Carthage's naval supremacy wasn't as invincible as the legends suggest. Sure, they had their moments of glory, but maintaining dominance over the Mediterranean wasn't like owning a yacht club. It was a constant battle against the elements, rival powers, and the inevitable wear and tear of ships and men. The sea was as much an enemy as it was an ally, and the triumphs of Carthaginian sailors often came at a steep price. So, while the tales of Carthaginian naval dominance might echo through history, it's crucial to remember the reality behind the romance. This wasn't just about gallant sea battles and heroic conquests. It was about the relentless grind of maintaining control over a vast maritime empire. The reality was far grittier, a testament to the sheer grit and tenacity of those who kept the Carthaginian navy afloat, quite literally. As you wander through this midday exploration of Carthage, you begin to see the city for what it truly was, a complex tapestry woven with threads of power, politics, and pragmatism. Each facet of Carthaginian life, from the bustling marketplace to the shadowy council chambers, paints a picture of a society that thrived on ambition and ingenuity. Yet, it's also a stark reminder that behind every grand narrative lies a web of unseen labor and sacrifice, the hidden cost of maintaining a city that dared to dominate the ancient world. And so, as the day stretches on, you're left pondering the dual nature of Carthage, a city where the allure of power was matched only by the harsh realities of sustaining it. In this bustling metropolis, the lines between myth and reality blur, leaving you with a deeper understanding of what it meant to navigate the choppy waters of Carthaginian society. As the shadows lengthen, you can't help but wonder what other secrets this ancient powerhouse holds, waiting to be uncovered as you continue your journey through the annals of history. As the shadows lengthen and the heat of the day begins to wane, you find yourself drawn toward the sacred heart of Carthage, its world of gods and myths. If you think your neighborhood church has some impressive stained glass, wait until you see the spiritual artistry of this ancient city. In Carthage, religion isn't just a Sunday affair. It's woven into the very fabric of daily life like a tapestry of divine intrigue. Let's talk deities. Baal-Hamon and Tanit are the celebrity couple of the Carthaginian pantheon. Baal-Hamon, often depicted with a crown of horns and a perpetual scowl, is the big cheese, a god of agriculture and weather, which, in a trade-heavy society, translates to being the CEO of crops and climate control. His partner, Tanit, known for her motherly vibes and fertility prowess, is the goddess you'd want at your side if you're planting new seeds or contemplating a family. Together, they're the ancient equivalent of power couple goals, revered in grand temples that make your average cathedral look like a quaint countryside chapel. But let's debunk one of the darkest tales about Carthage that has lurked through the ages like a stubborn ghost: child sacrifice. The Romans, with their flair for dramatic propaganda, painted quite the macabre picture of the good folks of Carthage. They claimed that the Carthaginians were tossing kids into flames like they were marshmallows at a bonfire. However, modern archaeology has a different story to tell. Sure, there are burial sites, known as tarfets, where the remains of children and animals are found, but the evidence suggests these were more about reverence than sacrifice. It seems that the Romans, never ones to let a good story go to waste, spun a yarn that would make Stephen King proud, likely to justify their own conquests. Religion here isn't all solemn rituals and sacrifices, though. Festivals were the ancient world's Coachella, minus the overpriced lattes and flower crowns. The Carthaginians knew how to throw a divine party with feasts, music, and enough wine to make Dionysus blush. These celebrations were a communal affair, a time when the rigid hierarchies of the day blurred, and everyone, from the wealthiest merchant to the humblest laborer, could share in the divine merriment. Switching gears to the artistic and architectural scene, Carthage was like the HGTV of the ancient world, constantly borrowing and blending styles from around the Mediterranean. The Greeks had their columns, the Egyptians their grand temples, and Carthage, well, they had a little bit of everything. Their architecture was an eclectic mix of cultural influences, like a Pinterest board come to life. Imagine wandering through a city where Phoenician sandstone meets Greek marble, with just a hint of Egyptian grandeur thrown in for good measure. The arts in Carthage weren't just about aesthetics. They were a testament to the city's role as a cultural crossroads. Carthaginian artisans crafted intricate mosaics and pottery that were as much a part of everyday life as they were symbols of the city's wealth and sophistication. Their pottery, often adorned with motifs of mythological creatures and floral designs, wasn't just for show. It was the Tupperware of the ancient world, used in trade and daily dining alike. Yet, for all its glory, Carthaginian art had a purpose beyond beauty. It was a visual narrative of their identity, a way to assert their place in the world. Each piece, whether a humble bowl or an opulent mosaic, told a story of cultural fusion and adaptation. This was no mere imitation. It was innovation, a testament to the city's resilience and creativity in the face of ever-shifting political and cultural tides. As you meander through the city, it becomes clear that Carthage was a place where the sacred and the secular danced a delicate tango. The lines between worship and daily life blurred, with temples serving not just as places of reverence, but as community hubs. Here, religion was less about dogma and more about connection, to the gods, to the community, and to the ever-unfolding drama that was life in the ancient Mediterranean. In the end, Carthage's cultural legacy is a rich tapestry woven with threads of trade, religion, and artistic expression. It's a city that defied simple categorization, instead opting to be a dynamic blend of influences from every corner of the known world. And as you reflect on the sights and sounds of this ancient metropolis, you can't help but marvel at the intricate dance between myth and reality, a dance that continues to captivate the imagination long after the city's stones have crumbled. So, as afternoon turns to evening and the city begins to cool in the soft glow of the setting sun, you're left pondering the layers of history beneath your feet. Carthage, with its guards, its art, and its indomitable spirit, remains a testament to the power of cultural confluence. And as your journey through this ancient world continues, one thing is clear. The story of Carthage is far from over. There's still more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more realities to explore as you delve deeper into the annals of history. As the golden glow of the sunset washes over the city, Carthage transforms into a place where the day's heat and hustle give way to the cooler, more introspective hours. But don't let the serene evening light fool you. Living in ancient Carthage was no walk in the park, unless that park had a suspicious odor and a severe lack of sanitation. Yes, folks, welcome to the gritty reality of urban life in the ancient world, where the phrase, "don't drink the water," was less of a precaution and more of a survival strategy. Picture this. You're navigating narrow streets teeming with people, animals, and the occasional runaway cart. Now, toss in open drains and waste tossed out of windows with the nonchalance of someone discarding yesterday's news. The smell, let's just say it's an acquired taste, like a pungent cheese or a particularly enthusiastic incense. If you've ever cursed your way through a modern plumbing issue, spare a thought for the Carthaginians who had to contend with sanitation systems that were, at best, an optimistic experiment in urban planning. But enough about the olfactory assault. Let's talk warfare, the less than glamorous backbone of Carthage's history. If you thought your daily commute was a battle, try living in a city that's perpetually on the brink of war. Carthage was the ancient world's equivalent of a military gym, constantly flexing its muscles against the looming threat of Rome. The Punic Wars, a trilogy more intense than any Hollywood blockbuster, defined the era. These conflicts weren't just about two cities duking it out over territory. They were about existential survival. Let's dive into some cold, hard facts. The First Punic War kicked off in 264 BCE and dragged on for 23 grueling years. That's nearly a quarter century of blood, sweat, and tears, mostly literal. Carthage, with its mighty naval force, faced off against Rome, an up-and-coming land power with a serious case of expansion fever. The war ended in a Roman victory, with Carthage forced to cough up a hefty indemnity and surrender its control over Sicily, one of its prime assets. Fast forward to the Second Punic War, and you'll find Carthage in a bind, led by the legendary Hannibal Barca. Now, Hannibal wasn't just a man with a plan. He was a logistical mastermind. his infamous crossing of the Alps in 218 BCE with an army that included elephants. Yes, elephants. Wasn't just daring, it was downright audacious. Imagine leading a pack of these pachyderms through icy mountain passes, with each step potentially the last. This wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a high-stakes game of chess with nature itself. Hannibal's trek was more than a geographical feat. It was a psychological strategy aimed at rattling the Romans to their core. And it worked, kind of. While the Romans were busy picking their jaws off the floor, Hannibal tore through the Italian peninsula like a whirlwind. Yet, despite his tactical brilliance, he was ultimately unable to strike the death blow. Carthage simply couldn't support his campaign indefinitely, and the Romans, proving to be as stubborn as a mule in mud, eventually turned the tide back in their favor. So, what did this mean for the average Carthaginian? Well, the constant state of war had a way of seeping into every aspect of life. Resources were stretched thin, and the economy, while still bustling, had to cater to the demands of a military campaign that seemed never-ending. Taxes were high. The strain on manpower was palpable, with every able-bodied man potentially called to arms. The threat from Rome was like an ever-present shadow, casting a long and ominous reach over the city. And speaking of ominous, let's not forget the final act in this trilogy of terror, the Third Punic War. By 149 BCE, Rome had had enough of Carthage's resilience and decided to eliminate the threat once and for all. The siege of Carthage was a brutal affair, lasting 3 years before the city finally fell in 146 BCE. The Romans, in a display of ruthlessness that would make even the most hardened military commanders wince, destroyed Carthage, leaving only ruins in their wake. Yet, for all its darkness, the story of Carthage is not without its moments of gallantry and resilience. The city was a beacon of innovation and cultural fusion, a place where the arts flourished alongside the harsh realities of war. The Carthaginians, despite facing overwhelming odds, displayed a tenacity that is nothing short of legendary. It's a testament to the human spirit, to the power of ingenuity and endurance in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. As you ponder the intricacies of life in Carthage, one thing becomes clear. This was a city that never did anything by halves. Whether it was trade, warfare, or cultural exchange, Carthage approached it all with a gusto that leaves a lasting impression. The city's legacy is a complex tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, a reminder that history is never just black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of experiences, a dance between myth and reality that continues to captivate and inspire. And so, as the stars begin to twinkle over the ancient skyline, you're left with an appreciation for the people who once called Carthage home. Their story is one of courage and complexity, a narrative that defies easy categorization. As you prepare to delve deeper into the annals of this remarkable city's history, remember that the journey through Carthage's past is far from over. There are more stories to uncover, more myths to unravel, and more truths to discover in the ever-fascinating saga of this ancient powerhouse. As the stars twinkle over the ancient skyline, it's time to reflect on the grand narrative of Carthage, a tale that's as much about human ambition as it is about geography. Carthage rose like a meteor, dazzling in its brilliance, only to crash spectacularly under the relentless hammer of Roman ambition. It's a saga that mirrors the rise and fall of so many great powers throughout history, a testament to both the triumphs and follies of humanity. Let's start with Carthage's economic wizardry. This city was the Steve Jobs of antiquity, innovating in trade like it was an art form. Carthage's merchants could haggle with the best of them, turning the Mediterranean into their personal playground. They didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas, weaving a network of cultural exchange that was as rich as the goods they bartered. Those little bronze frisbees they called coins were more than currency. They were the lifeblood of an economic empire that thrived on the ebb and flow of maritime commerce. But here comes the twist. While Carthage was the envy of many, it was also a cautionary tale. For all its economic might, the city was constantly shadowed by the looming menace of Rome. The Romans, with their insatiable appetite for dominance, were like the annoying neighbor who just couldn't stand seeing someone else succeed. They watched, they waited, and when the time was right, they pounced. Carthage's fall was as inevitable as a Greek tragedy, scripted by the gods but played out by men. Yet we can't just blame Rome for Carthage's demise. The city was, in many ways, a victim of its own success. Its reliance on mercenaries was a double-edged sword. Sure, hiring foreign soldiers made sense in a city focused on trade, but when push came to shove, those hired hands weren't exactly brimming with loyalty. It's a bit like outsourcing your family reunion, planning to someone who's never met your relatives. Things are bound to go awry. Meanwhile, back home, the political scene was a veritable circus. The Council of 104, with its shadowy dealings and backroom agreements, might have been effective in maintaining the illusion of stability, but it was hardly a beacon of democratic governance. The average Carthaginian had about as much say in their government as a hamster does in choosing its wheel. This wasn't a city where the voice of the people reigned supreme. It was more of an oligarchic puppet show, with the strings pulled by those who knew how to play the game. Now, let's talk legacy. Carthage, despite its fiery end, left an indelible mark on history. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps remains one of the most audacious military maneuvers of all time, a tale of grit and strategy that still captivates military historians. Carthage's maritime prowess set the stage for future naval innovations, and its cultural exchanges enriched the Mediterranean basin, creating a tapestry of shared knowledge that outlasted the city itself. And what of the myths? Well, they're a package deal with history. The Romans, ever the dramatists, painted Carthage as a dark, barbaric place to justify their conquest. Yet, archaeological evidence suggests a more nuanced picture, one where Carthage was not just a city of war and sacrifice, but a vibrant hub of culture and commerce. The Tarfits, once thought to be sites of child sacrifice, are now understood as places of memorial and reverence. It's a reminder that history is written by the victors, who sometimes prefer a gripping story over a complicated truth. As you mull over Carthage's tale, consider the lessons it offers. This was a city that thrived on innovation, yet its downfall was precipitated by hubris and external pressure. It's a narrative repeated through history, where the seeds of greatness also sow the roots of vulnerability. Carthage's story is a reminder that power and prosperity are as ephemeral as the tides, always subject to the whims of fortune and the ambitions of rivals. But let's face it, surviving a day in ancient Carthage would have been a Herculean task for most modern souls. The lack of modern amenities, the constant threat of war, and the political machinations would make even the most adventurous time traveler think twice. It's a city that demanded resilience, adaptability, and a stomach strong enough to handle the less-than-pleasant aromas wafting through the air. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's appreciate Carthage for what it truly was, a city of contrasts, where the romance of myth meets the grit of reality. Its story is a dance between light and shadow, a testament to human endeavor and the eternal struggle for power. And while the stones of Carthage may have crumbled, its legacy endures, a beacon of curiosity and wonder that continues to captivate our imagination. So, as you drift off to sleep, filled with new insights and a newfound appreciation for the complexities of ancient life, remember that the past is never truly past. It lingers in stories, in lessons, and in the echoes of a city that dared to dream big, even against the odds. Carthage, with all its splendor and strife, remains a testament to the enduring spirit of human ambition, a story that, despite its end, continues to inspire and intrigue. You're jolted awake by the chorus of howler monkeys and the rising sun filtering through your thatched roof. No need for an alarm clock when nature's got your back. Welcome to your day as an ancient Mesoamerican, where time is dictated by celestial bodies and the neighbors' bustling chatter. You're in the heart of a civilization that's nailed down the art of starting the day with a bang, long before the invention of caffeine. As you shake off the sleep, your first ritual involves acknowledging the sun. This isn't just any star, it's the star, literally the kingpin of your day. The Maya, for instance, didn't just casually check the time on their sundials. They had entire pyramids aligned to celebrate solar events. The El Castillo Pyramid at Chichen Itza, that's not just a stone structure. It's a calendar wrapped in a monument's clothing with 365 steps for each day of the year. It's like having a stone-cold reminder of how long you've got left until you need to plant those crops. Your morning routine might include a quick glance at the sky to see where the sun sits. In Aztec land, known as Tenochtitlan, the marketplace starts buzzing with activity as soon as the sun hits a certain angle. No wristwatches here, just a collective understanding that when the sun's at that sweet spot, it's time to start bartering. And what a marketplace it is. Picture this, a sprawling hub of trade where anything from cacao beans, the currency of choice, to obsidian blades is up for grabs. In today's dollars, a rabbit might cost you around 10 cacao beans. That's right, chocolate was literally money in the bank. But before you dive into the economic frenzy, there's the small matter of spiritual duties. The Almecs, those enigmatic folks with giant stone heads, would carve out time to honor their deities. And while human sacrifice gets all the headlines, it's not the daily grind for most people. Sure, the Aztecs might have gone a little overboard during special festivals. Think of it as their Super Bowl halftime show. But for your average Joe, the day starts with a more subdued offering, maybe some incense or maize, to keep the gods in a good mood. Let's bust a big myth here. Not every ritual involves a bloody altar. The idea that every sunrise came with a throat-slitting ceremony is about as accurate as claiming every Renaissance fair features a real joust. Most ceremonies were about sustaining the cosmic order, ensuring the sun rose another day. In fact, many of these rituals were deeply rooted in community and agricultural cycles. You'd be more likely to participate in a dance or chant than anything involving a knife. And why did these rituals matter so much? Well, in a world where a failed harvest could mean starvation, keeping the gods happy wasn't just about spiritual fulfillment. It was survival strategy 101. Your morning rituals set the tone for the day's prosperity, both economically and socially. It's a neat little package of spirituality, community, and practicality that kept the wheels of civilization turning. As you finish your morning duties, the city around you is coming alive. The streets of Maya cities like Tikal or Palenque are bustling with people heading to the market, artisans setting up their workshops, and farmers readying their goods. The calendar, an intricate web of cycles and celestial events, plays a crucial role here. The Maya had not one, but 3 calendars running simultaneously. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day cycle, was the spiritual guide. The Harb, a 365-day solar calendar, kept the agricultural and civil life in check, and the long count calendar tracked the passage of eras. This calendrical genius wasn't just for keeping birthdays on track. It was the blueprint for everything from planting seasons to political events. The precision with which these calendars were maintained is mind-boggling. They predicted solar eclipses, planned harvests, and scheduled religious feasts with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker blush. Now, as you grab your woven basket, ready to head out to that bustling market, you can feel the pulse of your civilization. It's a place where the divine and the daily grind are seamlessly intertwined, where the rhythms of the cosmos dictate the rhythms of life. And as you step out, you're not just living in history, you're part of a grand cosmic dance that has kept this world turning for millennia. And as the late morning sun climbs higher, it's time to tap into the civic side of ancient Mesoamerican life. Forget the notion that this is all about warriors flexing their muscles and priests chanting in temples. No, there's a different kind of power play happening, and it's all about governance and community. Enter the Tlatoni, the big cheese in Aztec society, whose name literally means speaker. This isn't just an honorary title. It's the linchpin of the whole social structure. The Tlatoni is more than a ruler. He's a master diplomat, a shrewd economist, and yes, occasionally a military commander. Picture him sitting at the helm of a massive city-state like Tenochtitlan, with a population that would rival any European city of the time. We're talking about a bustling metropolis of perhaps 200,000 souls, a number that would make most medieval European cities look like sleepy hamlets. But the Tlatoni isn't some lone wolf making decrees from an ivory tower. Nope, he's got a council, a group of wise elders who help steer the ship of state. These council meetings are where decisions on everything from tax rates to trade agreements get hashed out. Imagine a room full of serious faces, all debating the best way to keep the city flush with goods and the guards appeased. And speaking of taxes, let's demystify that too. It's not all about squeezing peasants dry. Taxes here are more like a complex barter system, where tribute from conquered regions could be anything from textiles to cacao beans. Now, let's bust another myth wide open. The idea that these societies were all about conquest and warfare. Sure, they had their share of battles, but much of the society was built on systems of trade and alliances. The Aztec Triple Alliance, for example, wasn't just a military pact. It was a sophisticated network of economic and political cooperation. In essence, it was early globalization, Mesoamerican style. Trade routes snaked through jungles and over mountains, carrying everything from obsidian to quetzal feathers, the latter being the haute couture of the era. And while we're on the topic of infrastructure, let's marvel at the urban planning that made these cities tick. Roads. Oh, the roads. The Aztecs built a network of causeways and canals that would make any modern urban planner nod in approval. Tenochtitlan itself was an engineering marvel, a city on an island with causeways wide enough to march entire armies across. And let's not ignore the aqueducts. The Aztecs had clean drinking water piped in from miles away, putting some of today's cities to shame. Meanwhile, in Mayan territories, the story isn't much different. Take Palenque, for instance, where their architectural know-how wasn't just about looking good. Those towering temples and sprawling plazas were all part of a grand design, each structure serving a purpose in line with astronomical events. It's like having a city where every building doubles as a giant sundial or calendar, not just eye candy, but functional too. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Beneath the romantic veneer of soaring pyramids and bustling markets lies the gritty reality of keeping such societies running. The labor force was massive and not always voluntary. Conquered peoples often found themselves toiling in fields or constructing the very monuments that would cement their conqueror's legacy. It's a harsh reminder that the grandeur of these civilizations was often built on the backs of the many to serve the few. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting short shadows across the bustling streets, you can see the beating heart of these societies in action. The political machinations, the economic exchanges, and the sheer logistical prowess it took to keep everything humming along. It's like watching an ancient symphony of human endeavor, each note perfectly timed with the sun's path across the sky. And as you stand there, part of this intricate dance, you might just feel a sense of awe mingling with the heat of the noonday sun. As the sun blazes directly overhead, marking the midpoint of your day, the air is thick with the aroma of roasting maize and simmering beans. Welcome to the culinary heartbeat of ancient Mesoamerica, where your lunch isn't just about filling your belly. It's a ritual that ties you to the land and your community. Forget the drive-through. This is slow food with a side of spiritual significance. Let's start with the holy trinity of Mesoamerican cuisine: maize, beans, and chili. Maize, or corn for the uninitiated, isn't just food, it's life itself. The Maya even have a creation myth where humans are sculpted from corn dough. So yeah, it's kind of a big deal. In fact, maize was so central to Mesoamerican life that it was woven into the very fabric of their economy and spirituality. A typical Mesoamerican might consume up to 70% of their calories from maize. That's like surviving on a diet of nothing but cornflakes and tortillas. Talk about commitment. Beans, the humble legume, were the perfect companion to maize, providing the protein punch that corn lacked. And then there's chili, the Mesoamerican answer to blandness. These guys knew how to spice up a meal. Forget about mild salsa. The ancient chili was the real deal, capable of making grown men weep. Together, these three formed a nutritional powerhouse that sustained entire civilizations. It's the ancient version of a balanced diet, minus the kale smoothies and quinoa bowls. But how did they manage to cultivate all this without modern technology? No John Deere tractors here, folks. Instead, they employed an agricultural technique known as milpa, a sustainable method of farming that involved rotating crops and allowing fields to lie fallow. It was all about balance and renewal, a yin-yang of agronomy. The Maya, for example, were masters of this technique, cultivating maize alongside beans and squash in a symbiotic relationship that enriched the soil and maximized yields. It's like organic farming before it was cool. Now, let's talk trade. Those trade networks we mentioned, they were the arteries through which the lifeblood of Mesoamerican society flowed. Imagine goods moving from as far north as the American Southwest to the Andean regions of South America. The Olmecs, the precursors to the Maya and Aztecs, were already trading jade and obsidian as early as 1200 BCE. By the time of the Aztecs, this had evolved into a complex economy where cacao beans were literally money that grew on trees. Picture an economy where your morning hot chocolate could double as currency. It's like Starbucks and Wall Street had a baby. Now, let's tackle a sweet myth, chocolate. We tend to romanticize the idea of Mesoamericans lounging about, sipping hot cocoa under the tropical sun. The reality, chocolate, or zarcalatl as they called it, was a bitter beverage reserved for the elite and special occasions. It was mixed with spices like chili and served frothy. Think of it as the ancient espresso shot, a little bitter jolt to get you through the day. The Aztec Emperor Montezuma was said to drink gallons of the stuff, presumably to maintain his imperial energy levels. But for the average person, chocolate was less of an everyday treat and more of an exclusive experience, like finding a golden ticket in a Wonka bar. And what about communal feasting? This wasn't just about consuming calories. It was a social glue that held communities together. These gatherings were feasts of epic proportions, with entire villages coming together to share food, stories, and rituals. It was about reinforcing social bonds and reaffirming the cosmic order. You weren't just eating, you were participating in a tradition that linked you to your ancestors and the gods. It's the ancient version of a block party with a side of spirituality. But let's not sugarcoat it. These societies were also marked by stark inequalities. While communal feasting was a unifying force, it often highlighted the social hierarchies at play. The best food went to the elites, while the common folk made do with less. Those sumptuous feasts were often a display of power and wealth, a reminder of who held the strings in this cosmic puppet show. As you sit there, savoring the flavors of your midday meal, you're not just refueling, you're participating in an ancient ritual that has sustained your people for millennia. The food, the trade, the communal gatherings, they're all part of a complex tapestry that defines your world. And as you take another bite of that spicy maize dish, you're reminded that in Mesoamerica, food is never just about sustenance. It's a sacred act that connects you to the land and the cosmos. So as you finish your meal and prepare to return to the day's activities, you're not just a passive participant in history. You're part of a continuing story that has shaped and been shaped by the very land beneath your feet. Stay tuned, because the afternoon promises more than just a siesta. It's a chance to delve deeper into the social and spiritual dynamics of your world. And just like that, your afternoon in ancient Mesoamerica begins, with the sun's rays finally giving you a little break as they start their slow descent. But don't think you're off the hook just yet. Lunch might have been a culinary adventure, but now it's time to dive headfirst into the spiritual and ceremonial practices that are the lifeblood of your civilization. Forget about an afternoon nap. Here, the stakes are sky high, literally. First stop, the temple. These aren't just any old buildings. They're stone skyscrapers wrapped in layers of cosmic significance. Constructed with a precision that rivals modern-day architecture, these temples were astronomical observatories and spiritual hubs rolled into one. Take the Temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza. This isn't just a marvel of engineering with its 91 steps on each of the 4 sides, plus the top platform making 365, mirroring the solar year. It's an ancient calendar you can walk on. During the equinox, the play of light and shadow creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down its steps. Now, that's a show that never gets old, a prehistoric light spectacle that would put your average fireworks display to shame. The priests are the rock stars of this celestial concert, the intermediaries between the human and the divine. But hold up, before you start picturing them as ancient hippies in elaborate robes, let's get real. These guys are the original multi-hyphenates, part astronomer, part philosopher, part community leader. Their days are a blend of calculating celestial events and ensuring the spiritual health of the community. They are the keepers of knowledge, and the ones who could predict eclipses or the return of Venus with an accuracy that would make NASA envious. And let's not forget their role in ritual ceremonies, which, yes, sometimes involved sacrifices, but hold your horses. It wasn't all blood and gore. More often, it was about maintaining cosmic harmony, an ancient balancing act that kept the universe from going off the rails. Now, let's tackle the myth of the noble savage head-on. It's easy to romanticize these civilizations as primitive yet pure, living in perfect harmony with nature. But that's just a Disney-fied version of events. The truth is far more complex and infinitely more interesting. These societies were intellectual powerhouses, with achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy that were light years ahead of their time. The Maya, for example, developed the concept of zero independently from the rest of the world, a mathematical innovation that wouldn't catch on in Europe for another millennium. Their calendar system was so precise that it could predict solar eclipses centuries in advance. And let's not even get started on their writing system, over 800 glyphs, each with its own meaning and phonetic value. It's like mastering an ancient version of emojis, but with a lot more at stake. The architecture of these temples isn't just about grandeur, it's a testament to their advanced understanding of the natural world. Built without the wheel or metal tools, these structures are a marvel of engineering. The stones are so precisely cut that you couldn't slide a piece of paper between them. And it's not just about looking good. Each temple's orientation and design serve a specific purpose, often aligned with celestial events like solstices and equinoxes. It's like having an entire city that's one giant sundial, perfectly attuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. But let's not get too carried away. Beneath the intellectual achievements and architectural wonders lies a society marked by stark inequalities. The grandeur of these temples and the sophistication of their rituals often came at a human cost. Conquered peoples were frequently put to work constructing these monumental structures, their labor a testament to the social hierarchies that permeated Mesoamerican life. It's a harsh reminder that the spiritual and intellectual achievements of these civilizations were often built on the backs of the many to glorify the few. As the afternoon wears on, you're surrounded by the sounds of ritual chants and the scent of burning copal incense. The community gathers, each person playing their part in the intricate dance of ceremony. It's a time to honor the gods, seek guidance from the celestial bodies, and reaffirm your place in the cosmic order. You're not just a spectator. You're an active participant in a tradition that has survived for centuries, a living link in a chain that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. And here's a little mind-bending twist for you. These rituals aren't just about appeasing the gods. They're a form of social cohesion. In a world where the unpredictable forces of nature could spell disaster, these ceremonies provide a sense of order and stability. They reinforce social bonds and remind everyone of their place in the grand scheme of things. It's like a community therapy session with a spiritual twist, designed to keep society ticking along smoothly. But let's pause for a moment of reflection. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of these ancient rituals, to see them as an idyllic escape from the chaos of modern life. But the reality is far more nuanced. These ceremonies were often a display of power, a way for the ruling elite to assert their dominance and reinforce social hierarchies. It's a reminder that even in a world guided by the stars, human nature remains a constant, driven by ambition, power, and the eternal quest for meaning. As the shadows lengthen and the day draws to a close, you've been given a glimpse into the spiritual heart of ancient Mesoamerica. It's a world where the divine and the mundane are inextricably linked, where the rhythms of life are in tune with the rhythms of the cosmos. And as you stand there, part of this intricate dance, you're left with a sense of awe at the complexity and sophistication of these ancient civilizations. So, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the temple tops, remember that the story doesn't end here. There's still more to uncover, more layers to peel back as we delve deeper into the social and spiritual dynamics that define this world. Stay tuned, because the night promises to reveal even more of the rich tapestry that is ancient Mesoamerica. As darkness cloaks the ancient world, the stage is set for the evening rituals that will cap off your day in Mesoamerica. The air buzzes with anticipation. It's time for music, storytelling, and dance, the cultural glue that binds your community together. Forget Netflix and chill. This is where the real drama unfolds. You're about to step into a communal tapestry of sound and movement, an intricate blend of myth and reality that echoes through the ages. Let's start with storytelling, the original social media platform. In ancient Mesoamerica, oral tradition is the backbone of cultural identity. The tales spun by skilled storytellers aren't just for entertainment, they're vital threads in the fabric of your communal memory. These narratives carry the weight of history, mythology, and moral guidance, all wrapped in gripping plots that could rival any Hollywood blockbuster. Picture a firelit circle where elders recount the heroic deeds of gods and ancestors, each word a spark that ignites the imagination. It's like being part of a live podcast, but with the added thrill of not knowing if the next twist will involve a feathered serpent or a cosmic cataclysm. These stories serve a dual purpose. They preserve the past and guide the future. They're the moral compass and historical record rolled into one. Forget about dusty scrolls and tedious tomes. In a world without written histories, these tales are the living libraries of your people. And while we're myth-busting, let's address the idea that oral traditions are unreliable. In reality, these narratives are meticulously preserved, with storytellers trained from a young age to maintain accuracy. It's a rigorous process, like passing down the world's longest game of telephone, except here, any deviation from the script is met with a stern correction from attentive elders. Then there's music, the universal language that speaks directly to the soul. In ancient Mesoamerica, music isn't just background noise. It's a sacred art form that transcends the mundane. The haunting melodies of flutes carved from bone and the rhythmic beats of drums crafted from animal hide resonate through the night, each note a tribute to the divine. This isn't just a jam session. It's a spiritual symphony that connects you to the cosmos. The instruments themselves are works of art, crafted with precision and imbued with symbolic meaning. The huhurel, a large drum, is often adorned with carvings that tell stories of gods and heroes, transforming it into both a musical instrument and a narrative canvas. Dance, the final piece of the evening trifecta, is where music and storytelling merge into a living expression of cultural identity. Forget about your awkward middle school dance recitals. Here, every movement is a prayer, every step a story. The dances are elaborate, with participants donning costumes that represent gods, animals, and mythical beings. It's like stepping into a moving tapestry, where each dancer is a thread weaving a larger narrative. And while it's easy to romanticize these performances as purely artistic expressions, let's not ignore their social significance. Dance is a tool for social cohesion, reinforcing communal bonds and hierarchy. It's a reminder of who you are and where you belong, a shared experience that transcends individual identity. Now, let's debunk the notion of a vanished world. It's tempting to view ancient Mesoamerica as a lost civilization, swallowed by the sands of time. But in reality, their legacy lives on in ways both big and small. Consider the enduring influence of their agricultural practices, like the milpa system, which remains a cornerstone of sustainable farming in regions of Mexico and Central America, or their mathematical and astronomical contributions, which continue to intrigue and inspire scholars worldwide. The Maya calendar, once misinterpreted as predicting the apocalypse, is now recognized for its sophistication and accuracy, a testament to their intellectual prowess. And speaking of culinary legacies, let's tip our hats to the Mesoamericans for giving us chocolate, that irresistible concoction that fuels modern civilization. While today's versions might be sweeter and more accessible, the essence of Mesoamerican cacao rituals lingers in every cup of hot chocolate and every bar of dark, luscious goodness. It's a delicious reminder that their influence extends beyond the pages of history books and into our everyday lives. So, as you stand amidst the music and stories, basking in the collective energy of your community, you're not just witnessing the end of a day. You're experiencing the continuity of a cultural heritage that refuses to fade. The rhythms of ancient Mesoamerica continue to pulse through the veins of modern society, a testament to their enduring impact. As the evening winds down and the last notes of the flute fade into the night, take a moment to reflect on the day's journey. From the cosmic precision of the morning rituals to the communal tapestry of the evening, you've been part of a world where the past, present, and future are inextricably linked. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a living narrative, one that continues to shape and define us. So, as you prepare to rest, remember that the story of ancient Mesoamerica is far from over. It's a legacy that continues to resonate, a symphony of human endeavor that echoes through the corridors of time. And as you drift off to sleep, let the rhythms of their world lull you into dreams of feathered serpents and celestial harmonies, a reminder that the past is always with us, guiding us into the future. You awaken in a dimly lit room, the air thick with the acrid scent of sulfur mingling with the faintly metallic tang of mercury. Welcome to your new reality, my friend. It's the medieval era, and you're an alchemist. By choice or by accident, the jury's still out. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to transform lead into gold and maybe, just maybe, discover the secret to eternal life. Spoiler alert. You might find yourself more familiar with lead than gold by the time this is over. Let's talk alchemy, the medieval equivalent of the lardery if the lardery involved a lot of fire, questionable chemicals, and an unhealthy disregard for personal safety. You're not alone in your pursuit. Alchemists everywhere are hunched over their crucibles, dreaming of the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance that promises both wealth and immortality. It's the ultimate two-for-one deal in a world where most people are lucky to live past 40. But before you start counting your future piles of gold coins, let's get grounded in some economic realities. You see, alchemy isn't just about waving a wand and saying a spell. It requires materials, and those materials aren't cheap. Mercury, for example, can set you back a pretty penny. We're talking about 2 shillings per pound, which might not sound like much, but in an era where a skilled craftsman earns about 6 pence a day, it's a small fortune. And don't even get me started on sulfur, another alchemist staple. It's less expensive than mercury, but still costly enough to make you question your life choices. You might be wondering why anyone would bother with such an extravagant hobby. Well, the medieval economy is a strange beast, full of disparity and drama. Gold is the ultimate status symbol, a ticket to power and influence. If you could turn lead into gold, you wouldn't just be rich, you'd be a legend. Plus, the promise of immortality has a certain appeal, especially in a time when the average life expectancy hovers around your mid-30. And let's face it, the bubonic plague isn't exactly making people optimistic about the future. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The reality of medieval life is far less glamorous. You're living in a world where sanitation is more of an abstract concept than a daily practice. Streets are open sewers, and the idea of washing hands is as foreign as using a smartphone. Your workshop is likely a dingy corner of your home, cluttered with dubious glassware and mysterious powders. The risk of an unexpected explosion is part of the daily grind. Amidst all this chaos, you're armed with texts like the Emerald Tablet and works by Jebba, an 8th century pioneering alchemist who's basically a medieval mix of Bill Nye and a mad scientist. But before you get too excited, remember, these texts are as cryptic as a modern-day tax return. They're written in a mix of allegory and code, making your task less about chemistry and more about deciphering a cosmic riddle. As you fumble through this alchemical maze, it's crucial to remember that failure isn't just an option, it's practically a guarantee. The annals of history are littered with tales of alchemists who spent their lives in pursuit of the impossible, only to leave behind nothing but burnt-out labs and empty coffers. Yet, for every 10 failures, there's a story of success, or at least the rumor of one, which keeps the fires of ambition burning bright. So there you are, balancing on the edge of brilliance and bankruptcy, armed with nothing but your wits and a questionable understanding of chemistry. The life of a medieval alchemist is not for the faint-hearted, and as the hours tick by, it becomes clear why you might not last a day. But hey, at least it's never boring. And just when you think the life of a medieval alchemist couldn't get any more precarious, let's talk about the social and political circus that you've unwittingly joined. You see, alchemists weren't just the basement-dwelling mad scientists of their day. They were an eclectic mix of revered geniuses and flamboyant fraudsters, all vying for the favor of the big shots in society. Picture this. One minute you're a mystical sage, the next you're the medieval equivalent of a snake oil salesman. In this world, it's not just about what you know, it's about who knows you. Enter Rudolph Roman II, Holy Roman Emperor and the ultimate alchemy fanboy. This guy wasn't just into alchemy, he was practically the medieval poster child for weird science. He turned Prague into a hotspot for alchemists, collecting them like Parkayman cards. Rudolph's court was a veritable who's who of the mystical arts, a place where eccentricity was the norm and skepticism was left at the door. But before you start packing your bags for Prague, let's consider the risks. Sure, Rudolph might throw you a bone, or in this case, a laboratory, but the stakes are high. Royal patronage is a double-edged sword. One false move, and you could find yourself swapping your alchemist's robe for a prison uniform. Take the case of Edward Kelly, an English alchemist who won Rudolph's favor with promises of gold. Things went south faster than you could say transmutation, and Kelly ended up imprisoned, eventually dying in custody. Oops. Let's not forget that alchemy was a dangerous game, often involving more smoke and mirrors than actual science. Alchemists were like medieval rock stars, living on the edge, constantly walking the fine line between genius and charlatan. The famous Paracelsus, for instance, was both a pioneering physician and a man whose eccentricity was legendary. He once burned the works of Galen and Avicenna, claiming his shoes knew more about medicine than those ancient texts. Talk about confidence. He had it in spades. And then there are the legendary breakthroughs, or rather, the legendary failures. One popular tale involves a certain Johann Friedrich Bircher, who was tasked with turning lead into gold under the watchful eye of Augustus, the strong, Elector of Saxony. While Bircher never succeeded in alchemy's ultimate goal, he did accidentally discover the secret to making European hard-paste porcelain, which turned out to be almost as lucrative as gold. Not exactly what Augustus ordered, but hey, it's the thought that counts. Now, while you might think our alchemist friends were all about the gold and glory, they were often just as interested in the intellectual pursuit and the mystical allure. Alchemy wasn't just proto-chemistry, it was a spiritual journey, a quest for purification and enlightenment. But tell that to the guy funding your experiments, who's expecting a hefty return on his investment. You've got to keep those expectations in check while juggling the demands of your own curiosity. And let's not even start on the competition. The world of alchemy was rife with rivalry. Alchemists were secretive by necessity, guarding their discoveries as closely as their life savings. You never knew if the guy down the street was a fellow seeker of the truth or a rival ready to sabotage your next big experiment. Trust was a luxury few could afford, and alliances were as volatile as the chemicals they handled. So why did they do it? Why endure the ridicule, the danger, the ever-present threat of failure? Well, because every now and then, against all odds, someone would claim success. And that whisper of possibility, that tantalizing glimmer of hope, kept the fires of ambition burning. The promise of turning the impossible into the possible was too seductive to resist. Alchemy was a high-stakes game of risk and reward, where the potential for glory was matched only by the likelihood of disaster. In the end, alchemy was as much about the journey as it was about the destination. It was a world where science, magic, and ambition collided, creating a kaleidoscope of possibility. And while you might not last a day in their shoes, you have to admire the audacity of those who dared to dream big in a world that was often so very small. Just remember, the next time you're tempted to play with fire, it's always a good idea to check twice before you leap. Now, speaking of leaping before you check, let's take a closer look at what your average day as a medieval alchemist might have entailed. Forget the pristine labs of modern chemistry with their eyewash stations and fume hoods. Your setup is more like a medieval version of a DIY science fair gone wrong. Picture a chaotic jumble of glassware, retorts, alembics, crucibles, all precariously stacked on a rickety wooden table. There's mercury glistening dangerously in open dishes, sulfur fumes rising ominously, and let's not forget the lead, which you're desperately trying to coax into a more lucrative form. First on the agenda, concocting elixirs. These are your bread and butter, or perhaps more accurately, your bread and questionable wine. Elixirs were thought to cure ailments, grant eternal life, or at least make people forget about their medieval woes for a bit. The recipes, oh, they're as varied as they are vague. One might call for a dash of mandrake root, a splash of rainwater collected during a thunderstorm, and a sprinkle of gold dust, assuming you can get your hands on any. The results, often more toxic than tonic. Next, the piece de resistance of your alchemical pursuits, the philosopher's stone. This mythical entity is supposed to be your golden ticket, literally, to wealth and immortality. It's the holy grail of alchemy, a substance that can turn base metals into gold and grant eternal youth. In reality, you're more likely to find yourself knee-deep in failed experiments and surrounded by a cloud of sulphurous smoke. The philosopher's stone remains elusive, and your workshop looks more like a hazardous waste site than a chamber of secrets. But hey, alchemy isn't just about the big wins. It's about the journey, the process, the constant dance with danger. The essence of your work is trial and error, though there's a lot more error than trial. The 13th century alchemist Albertus Magnus reportedly said, "He who works with the true principles of alchemy will not find it easy to avoid explosions." And he wasn't exaggerating. The combination of volatile chemicals, open flames, and your medieval understanding of safety is a recipe for disaster, sometimes literally. The ingredients themselves are a testament to your dedication or insanity, depending on who you ask. Mercury, with its mysterious liquid form at room temperature, is a favorite. It's as captivating as it is poisonous, and yet you might be handling it daily without a second thought. Then there's arsenic, which you might know as a popular poison. In alchemy, it's a transformative agent, though it's more likely to transform your health than any metals. In this world of smoke and mirrors, there's a fine line between a breakthrough and a breakdown. Every experiment is a roll of the dice, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The materials are expensive, the process is lengthy, and the reward uncertain. But the allure of success, a success that could rewrite the rules of wealth and mortality, is too tantalizing to resist. And so, you press on, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval science with little more than blind faith and a healthy dose of hubris. Let's not forget the external pressures. You've got patrons expecting results, rivals waiting for you to slip up, and a society that views your work with equal parts awe and skepticism. The social and political landscape is as volatile as your experiments. It's a constant balancing act, and one wrong move could see you lose everything. Yet, despite the odds, despite the failures, there remains a glimmer of possibility. The thought that maybe, just maybe, you could be the one to unlock the secrets of the universe keeps you going. And who knows? Perhaps in the distant future, your work will lay the groundwork for real scientific discoveries. But for now, it's back to the crucible, back to the chaos, back to the quest for the elusive philosopher's stone. After all, in the world of alchemy, hope springs eternal, even if your experiments don't. So, back to the crucible you go, chasing the ever-elusive philosopher's stone with the tenacity of a medieval Indiana Jones. But before you get too caught up in the mystical allure of alchemy, let's take a moment to peel back the layers of this so-called mystical art and see what's really going on beneath the smoke and mirrors. First up, let's debunk some myths, starting with the famed Nicholas Flame. If you're picturing a wizened old man in a Hogwarts robe, conjuring gold from lead with a flick of a wand, well, brace yourself for some disappointment. Flamel, a 14th century French scribe, is often credited with discovering the philosopher's stone and achieving immortality. Sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, right? But here's the kicker. There's zero historical evidence that Flamel ever dabbled in alchemy. His posthumous reputation as a master alchemist is largely down to a 17th century book that romanticized his life and achievements, turning him into a legend long after his death. So, while his name might sell a few more copies of Harry Potter, in reality, Flamel was more about books than breakthroughs. This tendency to spin tales into legends was a common thread in alchemical circles. Alchemy, you see, was the perfect breeding ground for myths. It combined the scientific curiosity of chemistry with the mysticism of the unknown. People loved a good story, and tales of alchemists unlocking the secrets of the universe were as tantalizing as the latest celebrity gossip. The problem, reality was far less glamorous. Most alchemists spent their days steeped in failure, more likely to transform their savings into debt than lead into gold. But let's not be too harsh on our medieval friends. Alchemy, despite its lack of tangible success in the gold-making department, wasn't all smoke and mirrors. It laid the groundwork for the scientific method, albeit in a roundabout way. You could say it was the original, fake it till you make it approach. Alchemists were experimenting, documenting, and learning from their failures long before the scientific revolution made it cool. They were the OGs of trial and error, which is, after all, the cornerstone of scientific inquiry. Take Paracelsus, for instance. This guy was a real maverick. He challenged the medical dogmas of his time and laid the foundations for modern toxicology. His belief that diseases were caused by external factors rather than imbalances of bodily humors was groundbreaking. Sure, he might have been a touch eccentric. He famously declared that he had learned more from his own shoes than from the works of ancient scholars. But his approach was all about experimentation and observation, key components of modern science. And then there's the fascinating tale of Johann Friedrich Bircher. You remember him from our previous chat. He was the guy who, despite failing to turn lead into gold, stumbled upon the secret of European porcelain. It's a classic case of serendipity. where an accidental discovery turned out to be worth its weight in, well, porcelain. Bircher's work helped kick off a whole new industry, proving that while alchemy might not have delivered on its grand promises, it did push the boundaries of knowledge and innovation. Let's not forget the economic context that fueled this pursuit of gold. In a world where wealth was synonymous with power, the allure of alchemy was as much about economics as it was about magic. Gold was the currency of influence, and the ability to create it was a tantalizing prospect. But the reality was harsh. Alchemical experiments were expensive, and many an alchemist found themselves bankrupt, their workshops silent testaments to dreams that never materialized. As the centuries rolled on, alchemy's reputation evolved. By the 17th century, the rise of rationalism and the scientific revolution began to eclipse the mystical allure of alchemy. The transition from alchemy to chemistry was like swapping a cloak for a lab coat. Chemistry emerged as the new kid on the block, armed with empirical evidence and reproducible results. Alchemy, with its cryptic texts and mystical undertones, was relegated to the realm of pseudoscience. But here's the twist. Alchemy's legacy lingers on. It may have been an art built on impossible dreams, but it inadvertently paved the way for real scientific progress. The methods of meticulous experimentation, careful observation, and the constant questioning of the status quo that alchemists practiced became the bedrock of modern scientific inquiry. In the end, alchemy was a curious blend of science, art, and philosophy. It was a product of its time, a reflection of humanity's eternal quest for knowledge and mastery over the material world. So, while you might not last a day in their shoes, you've got to tip your hat to those intrepid alchemists. They dared to dream big, to reach for the stars, or at least the gold, and in doing so, they left a legacy that shaped the future in ways they could never have imagined. As we leave the dimly lit, sulfur-scented laboratories of medieval alchemy behind, let's not forget the lessons they offer. The journey of alchemy to chemistry is a testament to human resilience, curiosity, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. It reminds us that even in failure, there is value, sometimes not in the form you expected, but valuable nonetheless. But don't hang up your alchemist's robe just yet. There's more to explore in this tangled web of history and myth. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries and magic of the past. There's plenty more where this came from, and the journey is just as exciting as the destination. As we journey from the sulfur-scented past to our spellbinding present, let's unravel how medieval alchemy wove its way into the tapestry of modern culture. You might think alchemy was left behind like yesterday's bread, but oh no, it's been reborn in the fantastical worlds of fiction, where the stakes are higher, the explosions bigger, and the risk of mercury poisoning blissfully absent. Take Harry Potter, for instance. J.K. Rowling's Blockbuster series brought alchemy back into the limelight with its tales of Nicholas Flamel and the elusive philosopher's stone. Sure, Flamel's historical credentials as an alchemist are about as solid as a chocolate cauldron, but that's never stopped a good story. The allure of turning metal to gold and achieving immortality is the ultimate plot twist, a magical carrot dangled in front of both medieval minds and modern audiences. Hogwarts might be a fictional utopia, but the fascination with surpassing mortal limits is as real today as it was in Flamel's time. Or consider Full Metal Alchemist, the wildly popular manga and anime series that melds science fiction with the mystical art of alchemy. Here, the concept of equivalent exchange. To gain something, you must sacrifice something of equal value. Mirrors the painstaking trial-and-error methodology of our historical alchemists. It's a nod to the hard truth that while magic might make for great TV, even the most fantastical transmutations have a price. The series captures the essence of alchemy, the struggle between ambition and ethics, between what we can do and what we should do. It's a reminder that the search for knowledge and power is a double-edged sword, one that can cut just as deeply now as it did back then. But it's not just fiction that keeps alchemy's spirit alive. The modern field of chemistry owes a debt of gratitude to those early experimenters. While they might not have turned lead into gold, they did lay the groundwork for the scientific method, a legacy as enduring as any magic potion. Every time you pop an aspirin or marvel at a fireworks display, you're seeing the real magic of chemistry at work. The alchemists may have been chasing dreams, but in their wake, they left a trail of tangible progress. And let's not overlook alchemy's philosophical resonance. The idea of transformation and purification, of turning the base into the sublime, still captivates us. Whether it's the self-help industry promising personal transformation, or the latest fad diet vowing to turn your body into a temple, the quest for improvement is a universal human endeavor. Alchemy's philosophical undertones have morphed into the modern obsession with self-optimization, albeit with fewer exploding beakers. Now let's talk about why you, dear time traveler, should be grateful for your modern comforts. Imagine trading your cozy office for a drafty medieval workshop, swapping your latte for a dubious elixir, and replacing your ergonomic chair with a splintered wooden stool. And let's not forget the absence of safety protocols. OSHA would have a field day with an alchemist's lab. The medieval world was a place where survival was more about luck than skill, where life was as unpredictable as a game of Russian roulette. Your ancestors were tough, but they didn't have Netflix or antibiotics, so maybe don't romanticize their grit too much. Sure, the idea of alchemy is tantalizing. Who wouldn't want to turn a few pennies into a fortune or live forever? But the reality was far less enchanting. The alchemists' quest for gold often led to financial ruin, and their pursuit of immortality was as elusive as a decent Wi-Fi signal in a medieval castle. So while it's fun to dabble in historical what-ifs, let's face it, the Middle Ages were great for discovery, but less so for creature comforts. Reflecting on the alchemists' journey, one can't help but admire their audacity. They ventured into uncharted territories armed with little more than curiosity and conviction. In a world bound by superstition and limited by rudimentary knowledge, they dared to dream bigger, to question, and to explore. They laid the foundation for modern science, proving that even when the end goal is unattainable, the steps taken towards it can lead to wonderful discoveries. So, as you sit back in your comfortable chair, perhaps sipping a beverage far safer than any alchemist's brew, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these medieval pioneers. Their failures were many, their successes few, but their impact was profound. They remind us that the road to knowledge is paved with trial and error, with failures and serendipitous victories. And while you might not last a day in their chaotic labs, you're living in a world shaped by their relentless pursuit of the unknown. In the end, alchemy's true magic wasn't in its mystical formulas or its elusive stones, but in its spirit of exploration. It was a testament to humanity's unyielding quest to transcend the ordinary, to transform dreams into reality, however imperfectly. So, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the alchemists of old, whose legacy continues to enchant, inspire, and remind us that sometimes the journey is more valuable than the destination.